Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. I'm Chris, joined once again with Harry as we continue our journey through Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, arriving at the second installment in the trilogy, The Two Towers. Now, Harry, I believe this is your favorite of the
This is my favorite. Yeah, no, I adore The Two Towers. Don't get me wrong, the whole trilogy is a masterpiece. It's absolutely stunning, but The Two Towers does have that special place in my heart. So I'm really looking forward to getting the chance to gush basically about this for a solid hour or so. So yeah, really looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. And obviously we did our review for Fellowship of the Ring, which I think there's a link in the description down below. Please check that out. Not right now, because we are live. So please stick around for our Two Towers review, because I'm sure we'll have a lot of great things to say on it as well. But Fellowship, it was a wonderful discussion. I did my watch along last night to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Fellowship of the Ring. And, you know, we could have just left it there, right? And then waited till next year to do Two Towers. But the people demand Lord of the Rings, and we couldn't stop at one. We absolutely had to power.
We're happy to oblige.
Yeah. Absolutely. So before we do, we've got a very, very complex plan of things to talk about. Again, it's a very big, even bigger than the previous film, so much more things to talk about as well. But before we do so, just a quick blast over the socials. So to see when we are going live, this was quite a last minute thing in terms of this going up as live. So you can follow us on Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterbox.com/cinemasavvy. And of course, we want to hear from you guys as well. Let us know what you think of The Lord of the Rings, specifically The Two Towers or any of the installments of the trilogy. Even when we did Fellowship, we kind of branched off into talking about Two Towers and Return of the King in parts. It happens, guys. They're all like one big story. But we're loving the Tolkien hype at the moment and the hype around this trilogy. So please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and all of that good stuff. But with all that being said, we're going to dive into The Two Towers right now with our first memories of the film. So I'm going to hand over to you first, Harry. Can you remember seeing this film for the first time? And was it immediately from the get-go your favorite when you watched them all, or was that something that kind of developed over time?
Yeah, I think it's my first memories of this is probably the day after I watched Fellowship of the Ring, or at least the weekend after I watched Fellowship of the Ring. Me and my dad just sitting down to sort of bash out the rest of the trilogy. Yeah, I loved The Two Towers from the first time I saw it. Everything about it just spoke to me a little bit more than the Fellowship of the Ring. We spoke about it last time, but I feel like Fellowship's a lot of setting things up, and then Two Towers finally starts sort of delivering on some of those promises. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of setup that isn't really sort of addressed until the end of the trilogy itself, but I think there's a lot of more sort of complete stories. Like the story of Rohan is fairly well introduced, expanded upon, and then concluded in this film. Don't get me wrong, they play a crucial role in the later film, but their story really is The Two Towers, and Rohan really always spoke to me. I loved the aesthetic and the music and everything surrounding that. Fangorn I thought was fantastic. Obviously you have some extremely brilliant moments like Legolas riding down a staircase on a shield. I mean, as like a 7-year-old kid, that is the coolest thing that has ever happened and probably will ever happen. So yeah, there were some fantastic standout moments. You get to see Viggo Mortensen at his best, in my opinion, in this film, just going absolutely ham as the Ranger. You get to see why he is so respected as Aragorn, the character that is. You introduce some of my favorite characters like Faramir and Theoden, and yeah, everything about it really just sort of stuck with me. Not to say again that I didn't enjoy the first one, and the third one is fantastic in its own right, but The Two Towers to me is just it's the best in my opinion as a standalone film. It's the one that I could sort of enjoy the most without the rest of it. I could just sit down and watch The Two Towers anytime.
Well, I'm not too dissimilar in the fact that, I mean, my opinions have changed now, and I do gravitate more towards Fellowship as that kind of standalone film that you just mentioned. But certainly when this came out, and even after Return of the King came out, Two Towers was my favorite for quite a considerable amount of time. Certainly after walking out of that film, once again, that sense of, I mentioned the first time when I went to see Fellowship that it didn't really hold my attention. I had a very short attention span as a kid, and it wasn't until home video for Fellowship that I really became a Lord of the Rings fan. But then once that, hit video and I watched it many, many times, it was that hype then. It was that anticipation for the Two Towers. And I remember the trailer coming out. You had the really epic Requiem for a Tower music that played. And I don't know if that was actually the first film that music played. It's like the most cliched trailer music you can find. It was in like hundreds of film trailers. If you want like an instantly epic song, you always go to that one. I remember the original trailer spoiling the return of Gandalf with Gandalf
Did it
the White.
really? Wow.
So yeah, I mean that was all over the trailers. I can't believe like you'd never put that in a trailer nowadays. But I remember it feeling more of an event. There was that hype there around it. I was now a Lord of the Rings fan, and I was about to see the next installment in this story, having no idea of where it's going. I still hadn't read the book at that point. I think I'd attempted, but as I mentioned, I bailed out pretty much early on, way before the end of Fellowship of the Ring book, and it felt bigger. It felt way more epic. You know, the actions dialed up. We are going to be talking about Helm's Deep later on. Like we have to,
Yeah.
but that not even just that, but the opening scene with
yeah.
Gandalf falling down with a Balrog, and that music kicks in. I think it's called Foundations of Stone on the theatrical CD, and I think it's called Glamdring on the complete collection, if I remember rightly. It immediately hits you with, oh wow, this film is immense. It's already opening like this, and it's the first 5 minutes of the film. And then, as you mentioned, it introduces lots of new characters, lots of new provinces and faces that will obviously continue into film 3. Rohan and the culture of it. So for the longest time, it definitely was my favorite. And I think a reason being for that is that I just love the three hunters storyline, you know, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. All of the Rohan section, and obviously it culminating at the end with Helm's Deep, was just the many cherries, the jar of cherries on top of a cake at that point once we get to Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
And I don't know what changed over the time, but I'm not like a book purist by any stretch of the imagination, because we talked about last time how well I think these are adapted, and I still think that's the case with this one. For me, there's a few more studio things that kind of came in with this one, maybe. There's some deviations which I'm fine with when I watch the films, but when I think about them, I'm not too keen on them. Aragorn's fake out death scene to ramp up tension, which, you know, I don't think anyone for a second bought that he was actually really dead, so that kind of goes nowhere a little bit. I know some people are really critical of, you know, the sort of the demonization of Faramir's character almost, which I don't have a problem with. But there are some things that crop up maybe that, you know, I'm not too keen. That's mostly sort of like the Aragorn fake out stuff in the middle of the film. But nonetheless, it's still like an incredible film, feat of filmmaking, and also pushed the envelope in terms of visual effects. Oh boy, did it push visual effects with this film, even after the first one. And I guess, you know, sort of like passing back over to you. I know that you mentioned you read the books after this point, but now that you have read the books, you know, Peter Jackson saying that this was the hardest of the three to adapt because, you know, structurally the book is very difficult to try and take anything out of it. So it's a miracle that the film kind of turned out as it did, really.
I mean, absolutely. Like you say, like there's essentially three separate stories being told throughout the Two Towers, and that doesn't necessarily get any less complicated when you get to Return of the King. But once you introduce the audience to that structure, it's a lot easier then to maintain it. Introducing that structure in this film, the idea that Frodo and Sam and the three hunters in particular have two completely separate storylines that really aren't going to coincide again now until the end of the trilogy. They're just doing entirely separate things. Having like the audience be equally invested in both of those parts is a massive undertaking, and one I think Peter Jackson did fantastically well. I think some of the extra sort of little additions that he added really helped to increase that tension and that engagement. So one of the biggest criticisms I think of the Two Towers in terms of the adaptation is the introduction of the Osgiliath sequence with Faramir taking Sam and Frodo to Osgiliath. They fight some ring wraiths, and then Faramir changes his mind and lets them go, and it's all entirely pointless because it had to be pointless because otherwise they're changing the entire structure of the film, of the story. But despite that, I think that's a great way to introduce that extra sort of tension for Sam and Frodo, because without that, they just kind of bump into Faramir, have a chat with him, then carry on walking and keep going, and then that's all they do in the film. So without that sort of tension, they don't really have any sort of stake. There's nothing threatening them per se, other than obviously just Gollum and that whole side of things. So I thought that's I understand why he made that change, and I think it really helped with the flow of the films. I think there are lots of changes. To me, this is the one that is probably the least faithfully adapted. That's not to say it's bad. Again, like I say, it's my favorite in the trilogy. But there are some things that if you are a book purist, you're probably not going to be happy about. One of the most notable ones, obviously, is the elves at Helm's Deep.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Which is definitely an issue, because to me the story of Lord of the Rings it's not about good versus evil, although obviously that is very much a very important theme. It's about sort of the dawn of the age of man. That's sort of like the sort of the appeal of it. It's the fact the elves are leaving, the dwarves are staying underground, and man are fighting back to sort of make their stake in the world. And obviously, because Tolkien viewed this as the history of our people, that's going to be the most important part. Is the idea of the free men standing up against evil and tyranny and all the rest of it. And so the introduction of the elves does sort of undercut that idea of man versus everyone. In the books, it was very much the case of it was men and no one else, because no one else is helping you. It's all down to us. We have to do it ourselves. And that sort of concept. So that introduction of the elves was definitely sort of a betrayal of the themes. That being said, it's awesome. So I can forgive it, because the music when they arrive is absolutely stunning. The lighting, Aragorn commanding them in Elvish, and everything about that is just so unbelievably cool that I could just give it a pass. That is the case, I think, with the Two Towers. It's definitely the least faithfully adapted, but it's really cool.
Yeah,
honestly, to me, that's all it is. Like, it absolutely speaks to the 9-year-old kid inside me. It's like, yeah, cool, Legolas surfing on a shield. That doesn't make any sense, but it's awesome. So let's keep going with it.
I still love it. It's
every
incredible.
time I cheer when that comes on, it's brilliant. It is
it's
absolutely ludicrous. Makes no sense, but I'm all for it. And the Two Towers is filled with those little things. So it's definitely Peter Jackson's vision. It wasn't an adaptation in the same way that the other two were, especially not Fellowship. It is Peter Jackson's looking at the book. He's taking the bits he likes, he's adding in some other cool stuff because that's what he wanted to see, and that's what we got. And I think it was all the better for it.
Yeah, and if you look at his, earlier work, Brain Dead, for example, which was an absolutely incredible experience watching that film. It's so creative, and just when you think you've seen one zombie kill, 2 zombie kills, 100 zombie kills, he will always surprise you with a new set piece, a new creative way of, especially when it comes to those gorier scenes or the action scenes, and you get that with Helm's Deep. There are so many sort of like individual set pieces within that battle that culminate and make it memorable. And I don't have a problem with the skateboarding scene. It's, there's no passage in Tolkien's book where it's like, and lo, Legolas took upon him the shield of the Uruk-hai and skated down the staircase. No, it's absolutely, it's so overblown, but it is all in camera. And I think that's why I can appreciate it more than I can with the stuff in the Hobbit films, where it is CGI and completely over the top, and you can tell what you're seeing is fake. There's wires involved and stuff with this scene, but it is so cool. And when that Fellowship theme kicks in, when he does it, it seals the deal for me. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
I think also it helps that most of the really cool stuff was just sort of given to Legolas. Legolas is a ridiculous character, but the rest of it is quite grounded, which I think really helps. Whereas in the later films like The Hobbit, everything starts to get a bit more ridiculous, and that's when I sort of lose the focus. Legolas is meant to be like the badass even amongst the badasses, and that's the point. Like, he is the elf among elves, and so he can just do all these things, and you accept it because he's an elf, and that's just the way he is, because that's the way they wrote it. And I think it's fine. I love it. It's brilliant.
But I think it's effective as well as a trope for that character and kind of a defining factor. Certainly by this film, that became the trope for Legolas. In the first film, I think the crazy stuff that he did was walk on top of snow without becoming submerged in it. And then he kind of runs up the chain, doesn't he, of the cave troll, fires an arrow in its head. And that's it for the first movie. This one definitely dials it up. He has that really cool mount up to the horse when the wargs are approaching.
Physically impossible.
I love it.
Not work.
I love it.
It's amazing.
And I know it's CGI as well, but every time I watch it, I can't tell where the live action footage ends and the CGI begins. It looks amazing. So you have that and the skateboard scene, but that in itself, they work into the story. And then by the time you get to Return of the King, you take that to its extreme. And at that point, I'm getting the impression that Peter Jackson thought, well, this is the last time that I'm ever going to be working with these characters, with Legolas. We've got to go out on a high. You know, this has got to be the biggest thing he's ever overcome, this Moomer kill. And it is really over the top, and it is really cool. But then it's punctuated with that beautiful moment at the end with Gimli. That still only counts as one. Which is a running joke, which is, you know, doubled down from within this film. And that always felt like a film edition to me, that kind of friendly banter between the two with the kills. But that's straight out of the book, you know. That is taken, that is taken from the book, that kill count. Yeah, so it does feel like something that's intrinsically written in from the film's perspective, but no, it's faithful to the source material. Not so much Legolas taking down a Moomer kill, but they work it in, and it adds to that banter and that friendship between Legolas and Gimli, which is something that I'm sure we'll absolutely talk about once we talk about the Rohan section more in depth. But yeah, the structure of this thing, and this is why I love this adaptation, in that if you adapted the book 100% faithfully when it came to the Two Towers, it would be all over the place. It doesn't work in terms of filmic 3-act structure. No. The book is written from the perspective of, I think it begins with 3 hunters, if I remember rightly, and it goes from like point A to point B, and then we start Merry and Pippin, and it reverts back to that point A part, goes to point B, we go to Frodo and Sam, and it arrives at like the same point, and then we go back to Aragorn, and that works for a book. You know, Game of Thrones can do that, for example, where it's all from a character's perspective or something, or you can mess around with, you know, sequential order and everything when it's in the written form, and it can work that way because it's a book, it's a completely different medium. You can't do that with a film. You can't have Helm's Deep be like your midpoint battle sequence.
The end of Act 1 is Helm's Deep. That's
it wouldn't work. And of course, Shelob is towards the end of the Two Towers
Shelob is
book.
in the Two Towers books,
And if you did that, then Frodo and Sam would basically have nothing to do come your third movie. So I think it was absolutely the right decision, the way they broke it up. I know when they originally went to Miramax with a 2-film split, I think it probably would have, you know, it would have followed the 1978 animated film quite a bit, because that film in itself has Fellowship and ends with the victory at the end of the Battle of Helm's Deep. So I imagine that would have been very similar had Miramax have snapped that 2-film structure up. But then when they went to New Line and they said, you've got a trilogy, that's when they had to go completely back to the drawing board in terms of the scripting and, more importantly, the structure of how all of these films are going to go. But I think it's masterfully done. And the way that events in the book are completely separate from each other, but in terms of the structure of filmmaking, they're paralleled, or they're happening concurrently. For example, the Battle of Helm's Deep with the Treason of Isengard, you know, where the Ents, the last march of the Ents, those 2 action set pieces happening at the same time, and then you've got the stuff with Osgiliath as well, and the payoff with Frodo and Sam. It's masterfully handled, and I think it is the best way that they could have gone about it, 100%.
I think absolutely, especially with the 3 hunters and the Merry and Pippin storylines, because obviously they're so much more interrelated. Having those 2 sort of play out at the same time was fantastic, because you get to see the 3 hunters hunting, and then it cuts to Merry and Pippin, and they're being carried by the Uruk-hai. So you can see that he drops the brooch, and it cuts back to Aragorn. He picks up the brooch, and you can see this chain of events, and then that all culminates in the brilliant scene with the pyre and the Riders of Rohan, and then Aragorn obviously piecing together exactly what happened, and then the encounter with Gandalf the White and all that sort of structure, which I think is absolutely brilliant. That sort of whole almost investigation sequence before then it fully splits, and then we have 2 separate stories entirely. The decision to sort of include those as one story and have only 2 strands to begin with is a great way not to overload the audience with all these different plot points right at the start, and just keep it focused on hunters and the hobbits versus Sam and Frodo. And I think having those 2 sort of stories play out in tandem is brilliant.
I think one criticism I have seen of this film is that, you know, at the forefront, and their idea of making the Fellowship of the Ring was, we need to keep this from Frodo's perspective. He is the focus. The whole story has to revolve around him. We cut out everything that's not related to him, and we always make his emotional crux in the film and his journey the one that's always at the forefront. And I don't think that's the case with this film. I think that the Frodo Sam storyline, Gollum takes a little bit of a backseat. Not to say it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's absolutely perfect for what they do in the film. But maybe it's with the amount of action scenes, you know, that you have the wargs, you have Helm's Deep. the Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli storyline with Rohan, to me, is the one that's fronted the most in this film. And that definitely takes the focus, I think. And I've seen some people be quite critical of that, saying that you kind of keep forgetting that Frodo and Sam are a thing in this film. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but I think that just inherently with the content of the novel in terms of being put on visual medium, of course, the Aragorn storyline that goes on is going to be the most memorable because that's where the most major, death-defying stuff happens, I would say.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I totally understand that criticism. I don't disagree either, but I quite like the Sam and Frodo storyline because it is so constrained almost, because it's so much more relaxed and comfortable, because it's not about them battling armies and stuff because they're two hobbits. They can't battle armies. That's very much the point of the story, is the fact that all the in fact, it's almost like a meta commentary even on the idea that Aragorn, Legolas, and all that side of things, the armies of man, are really taking Sauron's focus, which allows these two hobbits then to sort of slip through unnoticed. So you can say that it's even effective on the audience as well. So there you go. The Fellowship plan definitely worked. We're all in agreement.
We've talked about like the structure of the book and everything and how the film was adapted, but we are kind of going to structure our review in a very similar way to what Tolkien did with the book. So we are going to split it into the different chunks of the characters. So we're going to start off with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum storyline.
So I think the first. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say it picks up immediately, obviously, where it left off. And I don't know if you were going to talk about the introduction of Gollum as the
That's
as the
exactly
first
what I was
talking
going to say.
point.
That's where we have to start with, isn't it? It's the introduction of Gollum, and obviously the masterful performance of Andy Serkis. At the time, I think we were talking yesterday, actually, or not yesterday, whenever this last review was, about the idea of like the best sort of spectacle and the best monster design and CGI and everything that we've seen in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You said the Balrog, I said the Mumakil and things like that, but I cannot believe that neither of us actually mentioned Gollum, because I think that is such masterful CGI. It really did change the game. You see in any sort of CGI sequences these days, it's all motion capture now. Like that's the way it was. And back then, that really wasn't the case. CGI was sort of added in as an afterthought, whereas in the Lord of the Rings, they really took that and they made it what it was. I think originally wasn't Andy Serkis only hired to do the voice of Gollum, but while he was doing the voice of Gollum, he was crawling around the floor because he's a lunatic. And they said, "Hey, do you want to be in the film? Do you want to just crawl around? We can edit it on top of you." And that's sort of how that all came around, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I think the fact that neither of us mentioned it is because it is such a convincing performance. I don't think either of us even remembered that is monster design, that is creature design, that is all CGI. That's not Andy Serkis in any way, shape, or form, well, other than the movements, obviously. And I think that it's just such an amazing achievement in sort of like the technical prowess, which I think is often overlooked when we talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and Andy Serkis now is kind of like a household name. He is always going to be tied to that motion capture side of it because so much of his career has been based around that medium. Even with Peter Jackson, following this, of course, he went straight on to King Kong, did the motion capture for that. He's been in Tintin, which Peter Jackson was, around, and then of course the Planet of the Apes trilogy and Snoke in the first two Star Wars films. So he's always kind of been at home with motion capture. He has his own menagerie now, and I'm fascinated by the progress and just the evolution of Andy Serkis's career. And you can always kind of chalk it back to this one. I'm sure he was around before this point, but certainly these were the films that put his name on the map, certainly. And especially with this film, because in the first film, they hadn't quite worked out the design of Gollum. It was completely digital. I don't think there was any kind of motion capture reference. I'm not sure of in that first one. I'd have to go back and check, but certainly with this one. And also how we've seen this technology develop. Nowadays, if they were doing this, and I'm sure when they did The Hobbit, he had all the cameras on his face as well, tracking every movement, and that was logged pretty much live straight into, digital into a camera. Whereas this was still very early days of motion capture technology. So, of course, he was wearing the suit. Each scene had to be filmed twice, one with Andy Serkis present in the weird little kind of gimp costume he's wearing. And then it was filmed again without him there. And they always found that the actors gave the best takes when he was on set, because obviously they're reacting to something real in camera. The motion capture, I think, was predominantly used for the body, except for shots where it was, where he's like crawling vertically down a wall or something like that. But this is what amazed me. I always assumed, they animated the face with like the tracking dots. and they didn't. Like, the facial animations of Gollum in this were all manually done.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the monumental task of like the visual effects artist
Especially
trying to
because
achieve
of
that.
how expressive Gollum is as a
Yeah.
creature. Like, I think that maybe that makes it easier because you can go more cartoonish with it because you can have those massive eyes and the sort of over the blown
Yeah.
reactions and everything. But regardless, I think Gollum says so much without actually saying anything. I think the way that he moves, the way that he speaks, especially the difference between obviously Smeagol and Gollum, which I don't believe is as prominent in the Two Towers, but is certainly a major plot point
Mhm.
for Gollum. And it's done perfectly. You can always tell just from, again, Andy Serkis' phenomenal voice acting, whether or not he's Gollum or Smeagol, and those little transitions in the body language and the rest of it, which I think are just stunning. I honestly don't think that we've seen Andy Serkis at that level since then, because I don't think any of the roles he's had since then have been as nuanced as Gollum is, because he's
Mhm.
obviously such a tragic figure and has such a nuanced identity. I think in the Lord of the Rings, which is one of the reasons I love it, but also possibly one of its shortcomings, is everything is very black and white. There is good versus evil. Aragorn is a good person, which means he's a good king and a good leader and the best warrior and all the rest of it. I think Gollum really adds that necessary sort of shades of grey
Yeah.
of, because you never really know with Gollum. You never really know if he's on your side, if he's not on your side, if he's just been abused and mistreated, or if he actually is just wrong and all the rest of it. And I think I think Andy Serkis just delivers that absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, and I think that's why Gollum is regarded, and quite rightly so, easily one of the best characters in not only the
Absolutely.
films but the book as well. Is that sort of grey area to the character? He's a very complex character and just a tragic character, and he feels so. And I like how he serves as that sort of proxy to Frodo's character, in that Frodo kind of keeps him around almost like as a reminder, I guess, of what
Cautionary
he could
tale.
become, and just the hold that the ring can have over someone. And yeah, that cautionary tale aspect to it, and I think that's played beautifully when we get to Return of the King, which
Yeah,
we'll talk
I'm
about,
sure we'll
especially
talk
with that
about next
opening
time. Yeah,
scene. And even the visual effects across the trilogy, we talked about Fellowship, how they didn't really have the design down for it. This, they really nailed it. But even when you get to Return of the King, the animation on Gollum improves even more by the time you get to Return of the King. Certainly, like the facial animation, everything like that. I just read as well about the realistic skin tones when it came to like the visual effects. It took 4 hours per frame to render.
Yeah.
This is a long film, and Gollum's in the film quite a lot of the film as well. So that's absolutely mental. I think it mentioned about how long the facial like render as well took to do. It's on there somewhere. I'll come back to it.
Again, like the amount of craft that went into this, the team behind this. Again, it's something that everyone talks about when you talk about Lord of the Rings, but like the team behind the SFX and the visuals in general are just. If they're not making millions, they're underpaid, because the amount of work that they put into that film is just absurd. And obviously, later on we'll talk about obviously some of the with like the Ents and the trees and all the Urukai at Helm's Deep and sort of the efforts that went into that, which is just bizarre. Before we just get sidetracked with just talking about Gollum, I wanted to talk a little bit about Frodo and Sam as well, and sort of like the way this film really goes further to develop that relationship. Because obviously in Fellowship you do have like this friendship, and you can tell they are close and all the rest of it, but like that is solidified so much more in Two Towers. You get to see exactly who Frodo is, the burdens that being the ring bearer has on him, and Sam is this protective figure that is still just so obsessed with home. One of my favorite scenes in the film is obviously when he goes out of his way to try and catch the little box of salt, because it's just the last thing he has to remind him of the Shire and that little piece of home to take him. It's just beautiful. And I think it really just goes a long way to develop Sam's character. So I know you said one of the complaints is the idea that there isn't much focus on Sam and Frodo, but I think taking them out of the action allows you to focus much more on them as characters and individuals. I think the characterization of Frodo and Sam is far stronger than, say, Legolas and Gimli in this film. Don't get me wrong, Legolas and Gimli have cooler moments, but I don't think we appreciate their character nearly as much as we do with Frodo and Sam.
Yeah, and Sam's just the emotional rock, isn't he? To
Absolutely.
Frodo, and we definitely see that come into the focus a lot more. Well, I mean, it's present in all three films, but certainly from this one. And by Christ, when we get to Return of the King, there's many scenes we could talk about in that. But I do love those homely qualities about Sam. You're right about the box of salt at the beginning, where he's like, I thought if maybe we're having a roast chicken one night or something. The bit with the brace of conies, and he's making, we need some chips with a nice piece of fried
Potatoes.
potatoes. And I do love that aspect about him, and how he is, stalwart, and he always will stick up for Frodo to the end. And we do see Frodo slipping deeper into that darkness as well. The moments where he becomes a bit more snappy in this one, and he starts biting back. It's my task, mine, my own, and especially when you get to the end and he draws a sword on Sam. I don't think any of that is in the book predominantly, but it adds to that drama and just how much Frodo is slipping. And you definitely see that by the time you get to Osgiliath. Very kind of haunting, trippy, almost comatose state that Frodo becomes in at the end of the film, where he's kind of willingly just surrendering himself to the Nazgul, and all the sound cuts out, and it's that really eerie. And the cinematography as well during the whole film, but especially that stuff towards the end is incredible. And then Sam's speech.
I forgot Sam's speech. Yeah, no, absolutely beautiful. And again, like you said with that moment in Osgiliath, and it's Sam that pulls him out of it. And again, it just reinforces that relationship between the two of them, that Frodo is strong, he is the hero of the story, but there is absolutely no chance he'd have got even halfway without Sam. Like it's just that beautiful sort of give and take that the two have, which is absolutely brilliant. I think as well, some of the environments, while bleak, are really fantastic with Frodo and Sam. I love the I forget what the region's called, but the rocky bit at the start, and sort of like this sort of
the Emin Muil. I can never say that. I had such a hard time saying that name last night. It's just, it doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it?
No, not quite. But that section, I think it's such a lovely bleak atmosphere, especially compared to when you look at Fellowship, when you had just rolling fields of green and like these beautiful mountains and all the rest of it, and you see this lovely picturesque landscape, and then all of a sudden, straight away, we're taken to this dark, misty, rocky canyon where you can't barely even see the sky. Like it is just adds that sort of sense of claustrophobia, which I think is really important to those two characters, and that sense of isolation, which I think is fantastic. So they nailed that. Obviously, introduction then of the dead marshes and that sort of again the weird dream sequence and things like that, and then all sort of tying up to the meeting of Faramir and the Rangers and all that sort of side of things.
Well, there's a scene in the Emin Wheel. There we go. I said it all right this time. I don't know if it was on the DVD commentary. I think it's on the direct. I think it's the commentary with Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyens. And I only found this out quite recently. I think maybe a couple of years ago or something. There's a shot in that sequence. It's right after they capture Gollum, and it's like, release him or I'll cut your throat, and then Gollum lets out this scream. Then it cuts to sort of like this wide shot of the valley, and you can hear Gollum's echoing scream right before it's like, it burns us. That wide shot I always thought was like location. It's a map painting, and it looks
really,
and it genuinely looks like a real location. It blew my mind. And then obviously I don't want to keep harping on The Hobbit, but you look at it and go, well, that's digital. Just like fundamentally, like you can't trick the human eye, but a painting, a goddamn painting, and I thought it was a real location. I was like,
they do that
in New Zealand.
That's another thing as well. In Star Wars, they do the same sort of thing. Obviously, the Death Star originally and all that sort of stuff is just paint. It's just a paint, and then they film over it and things like that. So these are, again, Lord of the Rings using these methods from back in the 70s that were effective then and still are effective. And then later on, again, I think it's the last sort of bastion of these practical effects that we were talking about. You obviously have those standouts like Mad Max Fury Road, but some of those practical effects are just used to perfection in this film, which I think is absolutely stunning.
And you mentioned the Dead Marshes there as well. That is absolutely one of my favorite locations as well. Obviously, you can draw the parallels there, and I'm sure Tolkien did himself, even if he wouldn't admit it, to World War One and the no man's land and everything, and the horrors that he had to witness. The bit where Frodo falls into the water, one effect that I would say doesn't hold up as well across all the films, not even at the time, certainly the one at the beginning of Return of the King, is the underwater effects in this film. Even in King Kong, even in the extended edition of Peter Jackson's King Kong, there's a sequence where Adrian Brody's character's under the water, and it does look like someone just going like in front of like a blue screen or a green screen. It never quite looks realistic. But that weird, creepy, green zombified thing that comes out. And when I see scenes like that, and seeing Peter Jackson's previous films, he does horror elements so well. part of me does wish that he could have took a shot at the Barrow sequence from the Fellowship of the Ring book, because I think that would have been incredible under Peter Jackson's direction. I understand why he cut it out, but this is as close to that kind of sequence
no,
as I can
it
imagine
is such a creepy sequence, and it's one that, like, obviously watching this as a child really genuinely like terrified me. And again, now as an adult, I really appreciate that sort of like callback to sort of traditional like English folklore and the ideas like the will of the wisps that draw people into the marshes and drown them and all that sort of side of things. So that really sort of and that sort of like that Feywild almost kind of otherworldly magic going on that I think is so prevalent in Lord of the Rings. But I think there's at least in the first film, the magic is seen as this like angelic and benevolent force that the elves use, and it's really nice. And look how cool magic is, and it's kind of weird but mostly pleasant. And then it sort of gets more and more insidious as the films go on. You have sort of things like the Dead Marshes, and then later the Army of the Dead in Return of the King and such. I think that's a lovely way to introduce that kind of the idea that magic isn't good or evil in Tolkien's universe. It's just there, and it's kind of out to get you. So, yeah. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and you just sort of like building on what you mentioned about Sam and those homely qualities. Last time, you mentioned that your favorite creature is the Mumakil, and you get your first reveal of the Mumakil within this film. And I know in the book, Sam does like a whole song about the Mumakil or something like that. It's so many songs in the books, like so many.
Sean Astin adamantly refused to sing the song about Mumakil. Outrageous.
But that is such a cool reveal, and it's that element that by the time we get to Return of the King, we see those things in action. They're terrifying, they're imposing, they're wily. But in this, it is that sense of awe and wonder, and even when they're in the perils of the wilderness and the weight of the task that they've got to achieve, there is that brief moment of wonder where they're seeing something genuinely awe-inspiring, and then of course it all goes awry. You've got the Rangers of Gondor and taking it down. But one thing I wanted to... Oh, go on.
Sorry, I love that introduction as well to the idea of evil men, which I think isn't prevalent at all in the first film. Mm-hmm. Like you get like the people in Bree that are kind of creepy, but that's about
swarthy a bit,
yeah. But then you get obviously the Easterlings and I forget what the southern
Southrons, Haradrim and Southrons. I think it's interchangeable.
Yeah, but either way, and you get to see these people, and sort of like they're again this completely different style of dress and this different culture again, which we talked about before. Like the visual design for the different cultures is always so striking. To see that is absolutely fantastic. And then they've obviously the introduction of these sort of more morally grey men of the Men of Gondor. This is our first introduction to the Men of Gondor post Boromir, who ended things on a very sort of mixed note. So we're left with this idea of, are men good or are they bad or are they neutral? And you get to see this sort of play out. And again, I think through the character of Faramir, which, while very different from the book, I actually much prefer his film character because, again, it's one of those sort of, I think Peter Jackson liked to test his his human characters rather, a lot more than Tolkien did. So like obviously Aragorn right from the start, happily to go along and become king. Faramir at the start, happy to sort of help Frodo on his quest and just get him along with it. But in this, they are tested, they are exposed to the pull of the ring, and you get to see that side of that corruption of man firsthand, and it's absolutely wonderful. I love the sequence with the Forbidden Pool and the Rangers and all the rest of it. I think it's such a fantastic way to sort of showcase the differences between Faramir and Boromir and why they're both such important characters.
Especially the extended edition with that additional scene that you get that information, which completely alters the way that you see Boromir's character, and nicely kind of tees up for that dynamic that we're going to see with Faramir and Denethor come the second film. I think that's one of the most valuable extended.
Absolutely.
I'm probably going to ask that question later on, like what is your favorite extended scene? But that's definitely up there for me. I won't
be able to tell you because I don't. I just watched the extended cuts.
Oh right,
so I start with the extended cuts, and that's the way I've carried on. So I don't know.
Incredible.
To me, that's just part of the film. I forgot until you just mentioned it. That's an extended cut because to me that's such crucial information. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, and that's why I'll always champion the extended cuts over the theatrical ones.
I mean, I can talk about this with Return of the King, but with the extended cuts, you don't actually have a conclusion to Saruman. He's just kind of chilling in Isengard.
Yeah. The last thing that we get like a quick sort of B-roll shot of him looking over the balcony with Grima at the devastation around Orthanc, and then
that's about it. He's just like, right, cool. Ents are in charge, I guess. We'll just leave him to it.
Yeah, he's just like, and there Saruman must remain under your guard, Treebeard, and then we move on. There's no explanation of how the Palantirs in the water. Yeah, I mean. That's a conversation where we get to Return of the King, but certainly.
Sorry,
One thing I wanted to mention is and this isn't sort of like a criticism of this film, it's kind of a criticism I've seen, very sort of vocal minority, sort of like aimed at Tolkien, saying that, you know, this cancel culture now saying that Tolkien was a racist, kind of like how he handles specific groups of people, namely the Easterlings and the Haradrim, you know, people of color, or, you know, people of the East, how they're all blanketed as evil. You know, they've all been corrupted by Sauron. And if you read the Silmarillion, there are reasons, and there are good people on the Easterling side and the Haradrim. But there's a scene that's absolutely key, and it's in the extended cut of this film. And more importantly, as is the case with a lot of the extended scenes across all these films, they are directly pulled from the book, and it's almost quoted verbatim. I think it's one of my favorite scenes, one of my favorite monologues from Faramir. It's after he shoots that one guy out of the Mumakil, and he crashes to the ground, and he sort of kicks the body over, and he says, like, you wonder what his name is, where he comes from, and if he really was evil at heart. And he says, like, what promises were given to him to make him march so far from home. And when you read a passage like that, it's very difficult not to tie it back to Tolkien's real experiences in World War One, where, you know, they are fighting against kind of like a faceless army, essentially, that once you stop and think about, well, they were under orders as well. They have, you know, marched so far from home. Something brought them out. Were they really a good person? Were they a person doing a job? And it's those elements, and he brings that humanization there. And that's all in the book. So when people say like a blanket statement like, oh, Tolkien was a racist, it's like the scenes and moments like that, he's not saying that anyone is inherently bad. It's just kind of like a clash of ideals.
These are the bad ones. And that's fine. Like, I think a big part of Tolkien's beliefs in that regard is that there is good and evil on both sides. Obviously, there are some where it's much more blanket statemented. The idea that the elves are universally regarded as good, but even then they have their flaws in that they just don't care about anyone else. They are distant from the world. They are detached. They don't really care what happens to men. You have the dwarves who are seen as greedy and all that sort of stuff. And the reason for that is it's very difficult to add nuance to an entire race and culture of people in a film that isn't dedicated to focusing on that entire race and culture of people. Like, if somebody asked us to say, are the English good? I'd be like, I don't really think I can answer that question. You know what I mean? There are good people here and there are bad people here. It's the same in any regard. You can't sum up any culture, any groups of people in one sentence. You certainly can't do that as background characters in a film. So these particular Easterlings and Haradrim that we're seeing are evil. And that's kind of all we need to know about them. You have that bit of humanization with Faramir, and it's why Faramir is my favorite character in the trilogy, because I think he has that beautiful sort of humanization with every aspect. Every aspect of his being is just so wonderfully human, and that empathy that sort of carries him through and makes him such a, in my opinion, such a convincing character. Someone that, like, is just so enthralling to sort of see interact, especially in Return of the King with everything with Denethor. So I don't think that's really a valid criticism. I understand where it comes from, and obviously the stereotypes attached to like the orcs, so they were based on like Scandinavian stereotypes and things like that. But I don't think that's at all what he intended. You can, if you listen to any of the or read any of the letters that Tolkien wrote to many different publishers or many different people who criticized. Many different publishers who had like racist views at the times. You can quite clearly see that even back in the 1930s, he was very much an outspoken critic of racism and all that sort of things. And I think arguing otherwise is foolish.
So, absolutely. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about Faramir's character. So we talked about how in the book Faramir is much more he's almost like a saint. He's almost like not quite angelic, but he outright, you know, dismisses the ring. I think the quote itself that is directly from the book is that when he's referring to the ring, he says, I wouldn't pick that thing up even if it lay by the wayside. Now, David Wenham, who plays the character of Faramir, I always think of his character from 300 more so than Faramir for some reason. He also played the monk in Van Helsing, which is great, but he always has that voice. You know, I think he was on the Deadliest Warrior TV show as well, who was basically playing his character from 300 in the voiceover. You know, like his helmet was stifling. It obscured his vision. It's this really, he's got such a cool voice. He had never read the Lord of the Rings book. He knew nothing about the character apart from what he was presented in the script. And then, you know, he read the character, and then he must have started reading the book as he was, you know, on set and, you know, preparing for the character. And he saw how wildly different the portrayal was from the script that he'd been given and what he was working on for the film compared to the book. And I think he confronted Peter Jackson about this and said, now, is this right? And Peter Jackson read that quote that I just mentioned there about the he wouldn't pick it up even if it was by the wayside, and said that that would immediately kill the presence and the power, the all-corrupting nature of the ring.
Yeah.
And I am totally on Peter Jackson's side
Absolutely.
with this. There are moments in the film specifically, well, they double down on it in the extended edition where they can probably add a little bit more violence, but the men under Faramir's command beating up Gollum,
Yeah.
and, you know, like they're kicking him on the floor and like one's holding him up and punching him in the gut. I don't know if I needed all of that. I think that kind of demonizes them a little bit too much at that point. But I don't have a problem with him initially being tempted by the ring, because ultimately I think by the end of the film, and, you know, it's how characters develop across films, that's how you structure a film. By the end of the film, he arrives at the same place that he does in the book. So the same plot beat happens. But can you imagine that in the film? You're introduced to this character of Faramir. You spent maybe 5-10 minutes with him. The ring's put there. It'll do like the creepy Lord of the Rings music. And he's just like, yeah, no, I'm not interested. It's fine. You
on your bike, lads. Crack on. See you later.
That would be insane.
Terrible.
Like that would immediately dismantle everything that had been set up, not just from Two Towers, but also from Fellowship. And I think it would also have a knock-on effect for the future as well, because we could go, well, nothing happened to him. He was fine. What's so special about Faramir? He is just a man.
Yeah,
but I ultimately arrives at the same conclusion.
I think it undermines as well, obviously, because I think this is what I talked about. This is one of my favorite scenes last time in the Fellowship of Aragorn refusing the ring, and it's to show how great Aragorn is. It's to show that he is going to be the true king, because at that point he's putting aside all ideas of power to do what's right for the good of everyone. And if Faramir does the exact same thing, it's like, well, why is Faramir not king then? Because he's the son of the steward, he could easily be the ruler. Why is it Aragorn instead of him? And having this sort of more human approach to Faramir, I think is brilliant. Again, Faramir is my favorite characters in these films. It has been since the day I first saw them. I don't know why. There's just something about it that's so compelling. That idea of struggling to live up to the expectations that Boromir set. And again, obviously, I saw this extended cut right from the start, so I've always had that sort of framing in mind that obviously Denethor loved Boromir more and all that side of things, and everything that Faramir had to suffer through is absolutely stunning. That line of finally a chance for Faramir of Gondor to show his quality. While admittedly has been memed to hell and back, I still love, just from the actual context of the line, because it summarizes Faramir's portrayal in the films so beautifully. This person who is just willing to do literally anything for selfish reasons. He doesn't really care about Gondor in the same way that Boromir did. He's doing it for himself. He wants to show his dad that he is as good as Boromir, that he can save the world as well, that he is so fantastic. And obviously we've seen the end of Boromir. We know exactly what happened to Boromir, and we know that Faramir is heading down the same path. So to see him then eventually realize that without the context of Boromir really in any meaningful aspects is fantastic. You get to see what happens when Boromir and Faramir were presented with the same decision, and Boromir, despite being the better of the two, made the wrong decision, and Faramir was able to be stronger and resist the ring's influence and move on. I think that's such a beautiful parallel and leads so nicely into his character arc in Return of the King, which I think would be missing if he just straight away said, nope, don't want it, see you later.
Yeah,
he was never tempted then. If he was never tempted, what's the point? Then he has no strength to resist it. That just means he just didn't get it. So him seeing being tempted and refusing it is far more interesting to me.
I think you have the functionality as well of introducing Osgiliath earlier within this film, which immediately sets up for, you know, the sack of Osgiliath in Return of the King, and, you know, him being sent out on that suicide mission to reclaim it.
My favourite scene in possibly the trilogy with The Edge of Night, which again we'll talk about next time, but absolutely stunning.
You mentioned about the extended edition that you went immediately into the extended edition.
Yeah.
Are you aware now of which scenes within the films are extended?
Yeah, there are some parts. I know obviously Gondor at the start with actually it's not even the start, is it? But the idea of showing Boromir and Faramir as brothers and sort of retaking Osgiliath and that sort of pressure that he was under, the little flashback sequences and things like that. I still don't know all of it. If you sat me down and watched and told me to list the which ones are extended, I wouldn't tell you, but I know I can have it, and I can have a guess when I'm watching it which ones are, generally speaking, because they're usually framed differently and they feel almost shoehorned in at times and things like that. So you can usually sort of get an idea. Sorry, excuse me.
Sorry, I'm just having a look at some of the comments that we've had here. From Biovari says, I love the books, but imagine 75 minutes of Frodo, Sam, Gollum walking around and no action at all. It's different mediums.
I completely agree.
And then also, how do you explain Galadriel being tempted by the ring if he is not? Yeah. And then, you know, if you did throw Tom Bombadil into the mix, that's a whole other can of worms that you're opening there.
Gandalf was tempted at the start of Fellowship of the Ring. He so if you show them that Faramir is stronger than all of these mythical figures, that's kind of dumb. Even Aragorn considers it for a moment. So Faramir's just like, no chance, not doing it. Like, I love Faramir, but that would have made him such a dull character. So
you mentioned that he's your favorite character.
This.
I think the last thing I'll say on Faramir, he was always my favorite character to play in the Return of the King PS2 game, which is funny because he's basically an Aragorn clone when it comes to the actual gameplay of the character. It's just a new skin. But there was some reason that always made me always pick Faramir. Yeah, he's just really cool.
I was Gandalf. I was Gandalf main myself. A little bit of Gandalf.
Just constantly zapping, just cheesing the system. Just clear it all out.
Don't care.
Oh, I can't wait till we talk about the video game. I mean, this film also had a great video game.
It did. I loved the Two Towers game. Not as much as the Return of the King game, but the Two Towers game is excellent.
I didn't actually. So there was one for Fellowship of the Ring, which was under a different developer. It came out at the time of the film.
It's terrible. Yeah. It's alright. It's not terrible. It's not good though, is it?
I thought it was really difficult. I couldn't get out of the Shire. I couldn't get past
the
ring race.
It was a platforming game almost, wasn't it? There was like you had to like play his throne and like climb up things to find collectibles. I vaguely remember it, and I hated it.
It was kind of like a Legend of Zelda type clone.
Yeah,
it's the same developers, the ones who did the Hobbit video game, which is actually very book accurate in many ways. It's a game that I really want to pick up if I can. But the Two Towers was the one where it was like, right, we have the film licensing now and the film depictions, and that's where like your typical hack and slash came in, and then it was refined marvelously so in Return of the King video game.
Mean,
we'll talk about that.
It's some of my favorite co-op games as well, and the fact that like there was I think it was more prominent back then, but there are so many few games now that you can just sit down and play together. So playing as like the three hunters and like fighting over who gets to be Legolas was just so much fun back in the day. I have very fond memories of that video game.
There's still games that like occasionally if like one of my mates comes round, we want to get nostalgic, we'll throw it on and play a couple of levels. We're not as good as we used to be. I will say that I used to have it down to a fine art on that game, not anymore. Age, it seems, has finally caught up with me.
As dull as your reflexes.
Let's talk about some more characters then, because I'm conscious that we're coming up to an hour and we've only talked about Frodo, Gollum, and Sam.
Sam, Frodo, and Gollum. We haven't even got to like Rohan yet, and that's going to be an hour at least.
We're going to save that till last. We're going to save
we've got to save
the good stuff till last. Merry and Pippin. Again, I've seen people be quite critical of this. You know, Treebeard, it's really slow, and it's like that's fundamentally. That's what Treebeard's character is, and that's the point. That's the frustration in Merry and Pippin, that they need to take action. They want to get stuck in, and they've got to convince nature essentially to fight back. Treebeard in the books, Treebeard is my favorite character. That chapter I find fascinating. I love how ancient the character is. I love all the history he's seen. You know, he's seen the forest dwindle, and they are actually a very tragic race of creatures in Middle Earth. I think, you know, the whole crux, as you mentioned earlier, of the Lord of the Rings, as you look at the progression of the Legendarium, you know, you've got the really insanely high fantasy, almost biblical side of fantasy. When you got the Silmarillion, there's still wonder and joy to be had in the Hobbit, but then as you get towards the Lord of the Rings, things feel aged a lot more. Things have endured so many years in the world, and the encroaching darkness and everything, nature being kind of dismantled. There's that inherent weariness to the elves and to the Ents and the rest of the world, as you mentioned, you know, which sets the stage for men to take center stage. And the Ents are kind of at the forefront of that. I love the whole concept of the Ent wives, which is, again, an extended scene in the films where you get knowledge of that. But he's such an interesting character. He's almost like a wise old granddad that you just want to sit and hear him tell stories about all the things that he's seen and the wonders of how place names have changed. Thousands and thousands of years have gone by of history that he's witnessed. And also, like, if we're talking from like a film standpoint, and I remember asking John Rhys Davies this, I was like, how did you also get the gig for Treebeard? Because I will admit, Treebeard's voice, it sounds exactly like Gimli, because inherently it is the same.
I love the filter on his voice. It's brilliant.
I mean, there is a filter, but when I hear it, it's little orcs. Like, it just sounds like Gimli. It's just...
It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. It does if you know that it's Gimli. But I went for years not knowing they were the same actor. So
it's just a very strange decision. I mean, I love it. John Rhys Davies did a fantastic job. He mentioned that I think he's mentioned this in other interviews as well, but I asked, like, how did you come up with the voice, that process? And he says out of all the roles that he's done in his entire career, Treebeard is the one that is the least happy with,
Oh,
because he
really?
didn't feel personally that in his vision of what he wanted to do with that voice that he could physically achieve that. And he says even to this day it still keeps him up at night because he wishes of everything that he could have done with that. And he says that it's a voice now that he cannot repeat, because he says it
Wow.
is so physically demanding, the inhale and the
Oh,
exhale,
yeah.
and you kind of talk through an inhale, and it's
Yeah, I think
it's
it's a brilliant
extraordinary.
voice. I can hear so many lines running through my head now, True, and I can hear them like crystal clear as I'm watching the film.
And it
It's such
feels
an
like that
iconic
lumbering
voice.
tree, doesn't it? Like
Yeah,
how a
like
tree
it
moves. And
creaks in the same way that the tree creaks. It's a fantastic portrayal. Like I can't imagine
Mhm.
anyone else doing a better one. So it's very shocking to hear that he was unhappy with it, because I think it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, that's what I said to him. I was like, well, why do you feel bad? It's incredible. Everyone thinks it's incredible.
Yeah.
He's like, but the perfectionist that he is, I
Yeah, no,
suppose.
I'm sure it's very interesting.
But Merry and Pippin, it's once again, it's that dynamic duo with the two. Like the two are inseparable, and at least until Return of the King, where there's
Oh
the
yeah.
whole big deal where they become separable. Um, but I actually quite like where it picks up, with them being apprehended, and Mary trying to put on that brave face. There's the extended scene where they pour God knows what it looks like engine fuel.
Yeah.
Where it's like, can't take his drought, and they pour like this blood or this gunk down him.
Yeah, this I always thought it was some sort of very strong liquor or something like
Yeah,
that, but either way,
but it's
yeah.
quite sad to see, the fun, fanciful Merry and Pippin kind of reduced to that at that beginning
Yeah,
part
these
of the film.
hostages beaten up essentially and just
Yeah.
like threatened with being eaten and all that sort of side of things. I think it's such a great way to introduce the differences between Merry and Pippin as well, because like you say, in the first film they are just this double act. But in the second film, you start to get these differences. Merry is brave, while Pippin is a coward. But Pippin is clever, while Merry is foolhardy, and all that sort of stuff. And you get to see these sort of like little differences between the characters as sort of like time goes on. You get to see them sort of interact, especially much more with Treebeard and the way they sort of have to survive using their own tools. They can't be
Mhm.
strong like Aragorn or Gimli, or have magic like Gandalf, but they have their own ways of getting things done. And watching them sort of figure out what that is brilliant. I really enjoy that. It's not my favorite part of the film either,
No.
but it certainly doesn't take anything away from it. I think it's really interesting to watch them sort of grow and develop as the film goes on.
And it's
Because
great to
you,
see that ingenuity with the two as well. You've got Merry, who's very vocal at the end moot, but you're part of this world. I love that exchange that he has
yeah,
with Pippin as well, where Pippin's like, we've got the Shire. And he says, there won't be a Shire, Pippin.
yeah,
And it is that constant, he has to remind Pippin of the stakes of things, even to some respects in Return of the King as well, where Pippin is still very naive at the beginning, where he's like, we'll see each other soon, though, won't we? And Mary's like, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what's going to happen. He is very much sort of the realist of the two. But then Pippin comes into his own, where he has that genius idea of take us south,
yeah.
to take them past Isengard, and that all came from Pippin. So I love that dynamic with the two. What I enjoy about this adaptation as well, we talked about that in Fellowship, they removed all the Tom Bombadil and Old Forest sequence, but there are elements that they did
Yes, they bring it
place in
back,
this.
admittedly in the extended cut again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yeah, no, I love that little sequence in Fangorn when Treebeard steals Tom Bombadil's lines of getting the tree to release them and that side of
The
things.
Old Man Willow as well, that
Yeah,
similar kind of
that's what I
character.
mean. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I love that that introduction, because it's one of my favorite parts of the books is how weird it is. It really taps into that sort of like old English and old Celtic folklore where like there isn't really any rules about magic. It was just kind of there, and nature
Hmm.
was weird and wacky, and don't look at it too long because it'll blind you or whatever. And like that really is much more prevalent in Fangor, and I think we were lacking that in the Old Forest and in the first film. So it was glad to see some elements of that sort of creeping in, and the sort of again. I think magic was done in the trilogy was done by far the best in the Two Towers, because you get to
Mm.
see how weird and dark and twisted it can be, as opposed to just this force of light and goodness, which I think is really much. Again, to me, it's just a much more interesting and engaging sort of experience.
And I think if you are gonna, and they do that for a lot of characters, not specifically just Tom Bombadil with Treebeard, but so many characters. I think we'll talk about Grima Wormtongue not too long, but the wonderful monologue that he has, where he's trying to deconstruct Eowyn's character, you know, where he says, "Oh, but you are alone. Who knows what you've spoken to the darkness and the bitter watches of the night." That whole bit that he goes on about, that's a line from Gandalf in the book, and they gave it to Grima Wormtongue, and you know, nevertheless, it's still Tolkien's words on screen that we're seeing. And if you are going to give any lines to any character that belong to Tom Bombadil, Treebeard is the perfect one to do it, because they are very similar characters. You know, they're both very all about nature. Both are described as sort of like the oldest or the eldest things in Middle Earth, and everything they've seen. So the two are almost the same spirit, really, very much so when it comes to the characters, I think.
And I think it really adds to the characterization of Treebeard, because I think we don't get as much Treebeard in the novels, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time, because we have other Ents like
Quickbeam, yeah.
Yeah, who's, again, just obviously absent from the film because just isn't needed. So all of these characters, all this wisdom is sort of transplanted into Treebeard, which I think makes him a lot more interesting as a character, as opposed to just grumpy old Ent. It's now this grumpy old wise Ent, but also wants to move things along, but is also stuck in his ways, and it has this almost internal conflict of the character, and the scene with the Ent and then bringing it to Isengard and the harumph that summons the Ents and all the rest of it.
And that, oh my god, that last march of the Ents when that music kicks in.
Music again. We'll come on to the music later. I don't want to go too soon, but yes, that is stunning. That whole final sequence.
That piece of music as well is so often used for the Eagles, and people say it's the Eagles thing, but I think it's called Nature's Reclamation. It's whenever any kind of force of nature is rising up. It predominantly plays for the Eagles. You know, we hear it for the first time in the film where the moth comes to Gandalf. And then with the Ents, I think we even get a reprise of it, isn't it, with the Rohirrim? Yeah, it plays at the charge of the Rohirrim, just before.
I don't think so.
It's that.
You know, there are elements of
when the sun crests.
Yes, there are definitely elements. So there are motifs that are sort of played through it, but it's certainly not the same piece of music. But there are obviously similarities.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful moment as well. Really creative with the action scenes. I love that one that gets set on fire, and you just see he just puts himself out.
You're so worried about him, and he just dunks his head. Yeah, beautiful.
There was one thing I was going to say about that as well. I remember distinctly, and this is like a sense memory, and it was probably a memory that was also shared by me as well in the cinema, watching this for the first time. You're witnessing Helm's Deep happen, and I defy anyone in 2002 to say that they'd seen a battle scene in a film comparable to Helm's Deep. It's still, for me, the greatest on-screen battle scene of all time. Yeah. Even Return of the King, and don't get me wrong, the Charge of the Rohirrim's fan-bloody-tastic.
Yeah,
it's probably one of my favorite scenes in cinema history, if not my favorite, in all honesty. But none of the battle scenes, even in Return of the King, come close to the Battle of Helm's Deep for me. We'll talk more about it in depth, but where I'm going with this is that, you know, talking about the Treebeard thing, and actually, where am I going with this? Where was I going with the Helm's Deep?
Is it the fact that obviously the Helm's Deep plays out at the same time as the Ents attack on Isengard?
Yeah, no, I know what it was. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I remember it now. In that you're watching this amazing battle happening and you're getting invested, and you know the stakes are rising, and then it will cut to Treebeard, and I distinctly remember the whole audience going, "Ugh," like sort of like audible disgust that we've had to cut back to Treebeard, and it constantly keeps doing that. But that is the whole point, and you know I've come to love that now. It kind of saves battle fatigue happening, which is a thing that happens in a lot of action films now. It punctuates the battle, definitely. And you're meant to share in that frustration, that the slow moving nature of the Ents and how long it takes them to debate anything. And I think that was expertly crafted, and I think it was purposely done as well. And I think you absolutely get the effects of that come through when you watch the film play out.
Yeah, no, I think that's something I never really thought about, but think about it now, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, because obviously you will share in this frustration of Merry of wanting to, okay, the battle's out there, but we're stuck here with the Ents. Could the Ents do something, please? Come on, we need, the world is at stake, and having, again, that sense of urgency, that sense of, not even urgency, the sense of that you're feeling that, like, something else is happening that's amazing, and you're stuck here doing nothing is very much what the characters are feeling. I never even realized that is a very interesting way of getting the audience to relate to those characters.
And the last thing I'll say on Treebeard as well, I knew there was one more render fact on Wikipedia about how long it took to like process some of the effects of this. So apparently CGI Treebeard took between 28 and 48 hours per frame to render.
Yeah.
That is mad. And of course, on top of that, they also built the puppet as well.
Yep.
That housed Dominic Monaghan and Billy Boyd in. So once again, we talked about practical, that beautiful marriage between practical and CGI, and Treebeard's a fantastic example of that as
Oh,
well.
absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk about the Three Hunters.
Let's,
we
yeah,
might be
again,
here a while. I'm going to pass over
yeah.
to you.
Okay, so I think at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, it's hard to say who I'm most interested in at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, because I think that's much more of an ensemble cast, and you get to see all of them playing out, and it sort of jumps around a little bit. And there's no one that really like stands out to me. You like Aragorn because he's given a lot of focus. He's almost like I forget what the term is for like a secondary protagonist. It's like a dudeagonist or something like that. But that's effectively what he is for this film. Like, it's Frodo's story. Don't get me wrong, but like you say, in Two Towers, there's two stories going on now. There's Frodo's story and Aragorn's story. And I must agree with many people out there that Aragorn's story is just far more interesting to me whenever I watch the Two Towers. And it's absolutely the 9-year-old kid inside of me, because the opening sequence is just stunning. The three of them like running across the fields, the music blaring, and this hunt for Merry and Pippin is just absolutely brilliant. You have so many like little moments of characterization that really sort of reinforces this idea of brotherhood between the three of them. Like, you get a little bit in Fellowship, especially between like Legolas and Aragorn, or Legolas and Gimli, but you get the whole three of them now feel like such a tight knit group, like nothing could break them apart. And it's this wonderful sort of, obviously, this uniting of the three main races of Middle Earth. You see the elf, the dwarf, and the man, and all three of them just sort of running through the wilderness. There's some fantastic lines in it. Obviously, like Legolas, "What did your elf eyes see?" is something I say on nearly a daily basis. Again, in situations that aren't even remotely appropriate, but I just love that line. Gimli's line about dwarves being very dangerous over close distances, or short distances rather, and yeah, there are just so many little moments that really reinforce that camaraderie, and then it all builds into this moment when they're surrounded by the Riders of Rohan and sort of have to sort of confront what they are and what they're doing, and this sort of interaction. It's a fantastic introduction as well then to the troubles that Rohan is going through and all that sort of side of things. So I absolutely love that whole opening sequence. I think it's absolutely brilliant. You get to see why those three are the hunters. You get to see what they all bring to the table. You get to see Legolas with his scouting, and Aragorn with his tracking, and Gimli with being there as well, I guess. I love Gimli, but they do him dirty in the films. He's comic relief way too much.
Definitely from this film, I would say, and that's one of those studio aspects. It's like, I don't know if the studio said, or if it was just a conscious decision by Philippa Boyens, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, going, we need somewhat of a comic relief character in these films. Let Gimli be it. And Gimli had moments, don't get me wrong, in Fellowship of the Ring. You had the "not the beard" and some of those moments, but it wasn't quite dialed up to the extreme. It feels like every other scene with Gimli in this film is some form of comic relief. I think it's comic relief done well, though. I don't think it's awful or obtrusive or anything.
I'd argue it's worse in Return of the King, personally. Like, I hate everything with Gimli in the Path of the Undead.
Yeah, me too. Where he's like,
I hate. Yeah, it's terrible. Because Gimli lives underground. He's fine with going indoors for places full of dead people. He's been doing it his entire life. Give a man some respect.
No, that's from the book. No, I actually like that aspect. How it's like an elf would go underground, but a dwarf they're not. Like, that's from the book.
No, I know. I don't mind that bit, but it's once he's inside, he's still just like just goofing around.
He's
like
bumbling,
because he wouldn't do that. Because Gimli's a very stoic character.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting distracted.
No, I'm 100% agree with you on that, because I was going to come down like thunder on that in our next review.
Yeah, I'm sure we will, because that is actually one of my least favorite aspects of any of the films. Is the Army of the Dead in general. But yeah, in Two Towers anyway, I love those interactions between the three of them, and then bring that into, obviously, then to the return of Gandalf later on in Fangorn, and that whole progression. It feels so natural. Like, obviously, it's all done like in service of the plot, but none of it ever feels like there's any sort of reason. There's no plot reasons for it happening. It's happening because that's organically what's happening at the time. They're tracking them because they're really good tracking. That's literally what Aragorn has been doing since like the day he was born. And so they easily track them, but these are wide open plains in the territory of the Riders of Rohan. So they're going to get encountered with the Riders of Rohan, but they've been exiled. So they'll introduce them to the problem that's happening at Rohan, and then they'll move on. They'll get to this pyre, and they'll see that, and then they'll lead them directly into Fangorn, and they track them down, and they're introduced to what they think is Saruman, but obviously we know is Gandalf the White. And I think that's such a wonderful sort of escalation and such a natural plot thread to follow that I think the film just handles perfectly. I think it's perfectly paced. Like, I can keep talking because I just honestly think it's flawless. Like, there is
Yeah,
nothing
no,
I would
really.
change about that sequence. I think it's perfect. I love the conversation
Yeah.
with Eoma. Again, it's brilliant. Yeah,
Carl Urban's brilliant as well as Eomer. We'll talk
fantastic,
about
underrated
the
in my
new
opinion. I think he
characters.
nails that character.
Yeah, the whole first section, the three hunters, the running over the plains. Any time that I go out running, which is very rare nowadays, before lockdown, when I used to take better care of my body, I used to go on regular runs. I would always play the soundtrack from this first part
Yeah.
of the film. You know, the whole "their pace is quickened, they must have
Yeah.
caught our scent, hurry!" and that music that kicks
Yeah.
in over the plains. One day I will get to New Zealand, and one day I will hopefully run over those plains. It'll be an absolute dream come true.
Yeah.
You talked about quotable lines as well from that moment specifically. Keep breathing. That's the key. Breathe when you got Gimli running. Love that dynamic. See, that's where I say, like, the comic relief in this film, at least
Yeah,
with
I think it's
Gimli,
done
is done
brilliantly.
well.
Yeah.
How he is really struggling to keep up. One of my favorite bits is where you just see him like fall and just roll down the rock. You know, those two are keeping pace, and then Gimli's just like falling over and everything. It's absolutely wonderful. There's a very clunky line, which it sounds like it's a book line, but it always makes me laugh. It's where they're running and Legolas goes like, "They've run as if the very whips of their masters were behind them." It's such a clunky line and a
it's
little
such a
bit terrible.
Legolas line though, because he
It's
speaks.
such a
Yeah, because it's perfect. Because I love that Legolas is like, if he doesn't say anything, he's the coolest character in the world. But the second he opens his mouth, he's just this absolutely massive dork, and I love it.
There's another bit as well where it's where they enter Fangorn, and Legolas chimes up with, "This forest is old, very old." I'm like, yeah, no shit, Legolas. Thanks for that. You know, in Return of the King, right before the Palantir starts going crazy, he's outside and he's all wistful, looking at the. He's like, "The stars are veiled." I'm like, oh come on, Legolas, Christ
Yes,
Almighty.
it's cloudy. Grow up.
So, but that's why we love Legolas. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
that's the character he is. Love the three hunters thing. I didn't mention this with the Merry and Pippin sequence, but I'm going to admit this now. Might be a bit stupid because I was 9 going on 10. The orcs, I was genuinely scared by the orcs a little bit in this film, just a little bit, like not like crying, screaming, I've got to hide behind the cinema seats or anything like that. But I distinctly remember feeling fearful. And when I went to see it a second, I don't know how many times I went to see it. I definitely went to see it a second time, possibly even a third time. I would always kind of dread that scene coming up because it always creeped me out a little bit.
That one orc with like who turns his head and has like the sort of like the knife Shagrath or something, I think his name is. But yeah, I think I know the one you mean.
Are you talking about you're like, yeah, why can't we have some meat? That guy.
Yeah. When Pippin's crawling away and he grabs his leg.
No,
No,
I don't know.
Sharku's the warg rider.
Yeah, the warg guy. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
I think it's Shagrath or Shagrat or something like that.
Yeah, his character, and especially Grishnak as well, that pursuit into Fangorn terrified me.
Oh yeah.
And I still get that intensity when I watch it now, but like little 9-year-old me, that was like a horror film watching that sequence.
For sure. And again, it's once again Peter Jackson's horror sort of heritage coming through again in those films. He sets that tone of, again with the Howard Shaw's music, setting that tone of dread again, and they do those sequences really well.
And I love the tracking stuff. I love how it's intercut with, you know, the stuff that we see. And then when we get into Fangorn and we, you know, get the reveal of Gandalf the White, once again, I really wish they hadn't have put that in the trailer. Like, why would you do that? But even how, like, from the audio and the sound mixing, they overlay Ian McKellen's voice with Christopher Lee's.
Yeah,
great sense of misdirection. And then that reveal, the music kicks in, and then I know you wanted to talk about Shadowfax, the Lord of All Horses.
The Lord of All Horses. Yeah, again,
what a beautiful scene! How that's just everything about that scene.
Very quickly before I talk about that, I just want to quickly address as well how effortlessly Gandalf beats all three of the hunters. I think that's really interesting, just to show how much on like another level Gandalf and Saruman are as characters, in the sense that like, okay, there's three of us here with like the greatest warriors known to all three of our races. We can take him on, and immediately they all lose. Gimli loses his axe, Legolas uses his own, Aragorn drops his sword. that's it. They're done. It's over. And then obviously he's on their side, so it's okay. But
You
yeah,
get the
that's
payoff
that
with the
scene of
Balrog as well, just really quickly. They're showing Gandalf's power. Like, we get to see even how powerful he was as Gandalf the Grey. You know, full-blown magic battle. I was always confused about that as a kid because, you know, at the beginning we see them hit the water.
Yeah.
And apparently they did originally plan out the whole slime, you know, he becomes a creature
and
of
then
mud and
climbing up the
slime when he hits the
staircase.
water.
Yeah.
But I don't think the CGI was there at the time, or they didn't have the time or the manpower to do it. They fight up and staircases all the way up to the tallest what is it, from the lowest dungeon to the highest peak. But because you don't see that part, I guess I just didn't hear that line as 9-year-old me. So I thought, did they like magically go through the water and end on top of a mountain? Like I couldn't quite. It's a magic realm. It's a fantasy world. I don't know how things work. So I was always confused about that. And then now I'm older, I feel very silly. I wasn't the brainiest of kids.
Again, Ian McKellen's commentary over that sequence as well. It's Ian McKellen's thespian background coming in again, once again, in these films as Gandalf is absolutely stunning because that delivery of those lines, and like it's like is it like death took me or darkness took me?
Darkness
like
took
that?
me.
Yeah,
I strayed out of thought and time.
Yeah, that delivery of that line is always just like it makes my hair stand on end. Like now, just thinking about it, like
I love how McKellen plays Gandalf the White differently as well.
Yeah.
Like he's the same character, but he essentially is playing a very different character. The whole personality, mannerisms are so totally different from Gandalf the Grey.
That's what they called me, Gandalf.
Yeah,
Gandalf the Grey. I am Gandalf the White, and like those little like things of like again because you get to see like instead of kindly old fireworks wizard, it's now okay, we're sending you back, we're giving you a power up, get shit done, Gandalf. Sick of this, get me results. And yeah, so it's fantastic to see him go back and sort of have that much more colder and things, and it's always nice as well when you see the little playful side of Gandalf like poking through again. Like I love it when they get to Edoras. He's like, oh, you couldn't separate an old man from his walking stick, and he's like winks at Aragorn as they go in like the thing. It's nice to see those moments sort of still creep through. You can tell that it is still the same character, obviously played very differently.
And he's posing as Gandalf the Grey at that point as well, isn't it? That's quite telling there. But yeah, I took you off Shadowfax, the Lord of all horses.
Again, that scene is one of my favorite scenes, mostly because of the trivia that they did it in one take. Like that's it. Once he just sits there, Ian McKellen who whistles, and they released the horse, and it ran up and did that beautiful little arc where it runs backwards and forwards a few times. Like that horse is a natural born actor because it absolutely nailed it. One shot, and they were like, right, okay, we didn't plan that, but that'll do. The next scene. Here we go. Yeah, I absolutely love that, and we can. And I love. I do think it's a bit disappointing about the film how they don't really go into what Shadowfax is and the fact that Gandalf basically broke into Rohan and stole it, and that's why that's one of the reasons why Theoden doesn't really like him when they turn up because like a week before Gandalf went to him, broke into his stables and stole his best horse. Don't really touch on that. You just don't get the. It's not really relevant, but it does make Theoden and the reason why Rohan is so hostile to Gandalf a bit more understandable. But
he basically offered him a horse, didn't he? He says like, pick any horse, just get out of here. And Gandalf was like, I'm going to pick the best horse you have.
I have your horse then. How's that? And it doesn't. I don't believe he waits for permission. He just takes it and leaves. And they're like, no, okay, thanks, Gandalf.
Stop, please come back.
Yeah, all right, mate, come on. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Gandalf the White's wonderful, and especially you get that payoff at the end. Look to my coming at first light on the fifth day at dawn.
We'll get to Helm's Deep. Don't worry, Chris.
We still have time. We still have time. I just want to bring up a comment really quickly from Biovari again. He says, in the commentary, the actor said Gimli was comic relief because even if the story started light in the Shire, it got exponentially worse with no uplifting scenes without it.
Yeah,
it was a compromise for the casual viewers. Yeah, it's the function of filmmaking, isn't it? I guess you do have to have that element in there.
You say, I don't hate it. I think it's comic, like you say, it's comic relief done well. So I certainly don't hate that.
Certainly better than, hey, we're making Battle of the Five Armies, we need some comic relief. Here, have this Alfred character, who's like the Jar Jar Binks of those movies. But anyway, different review for a different time.
There's a lot of
We need to talk about Rohan. I know we're going to talk about the music. Let's talk about some of the new characters first.
Yeah, let's go. I think that's again we're talking about obviously the arrival of the three hunters and Gandalf now to Rohan, and this is just so brilliant. It's absolutely stunning. You have these moments of we haven't been introduced to the wild men yet, have we? That's after this sequence, if memory serves.
I think no, that's at the beginning because you have Saruman kind of stirring up things and sacking these kingdoms, and then it cuts to Éomer rescuing Theodred.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And
So
then we get to
absolutely, yeah.
Medusel.
So we've already seen then some of the issues that Rohan is facing, and we finally have the arrival and like the real proper introduction to these characters. And you have obviously like it's an obvious technique, but I love like obviously the flag flying down and like landing outside as Aragorn looks at it. You can just see that this is obviously a kingdom in crisis and complete disrepair. And you go in, you see all these hostile countrymen basically standing there and just looking at them all, and it has this wonderful tension that I think just really builds. The music obviously sets the scale of what's going on. It's my favorite piece of music, and I will hold off before we go right into that. But it's my favorite piece of music in the entire trilogy. But again, this introduction to the characters and this introduction to in particular Theoden, Grima, and Éowyn as characters. And I think all of those are brilliant. I think they're absolutely stunning. Éowyn gets a lot of hate. Don't like it. She's a cracking character. Love her to pieces. I think she's absolutely brilliant. And I think I forget the actress's name. Is Miranda something?
Miranda Otto. Yeah,
that's it. Thank you. Absolutely kills it. Absolutely crushes that role, and I think does such a wonderful job of like this very obviously like very beautiful, very like angelic character that is then but doesn't want to fit into that stereotype and resists that and becomes the shield maiden of Rohan and all the rest of it, which I think is just so wonderfully done. And I love the whole sequence of them arriving at the throne room and the arguments that ensue between obviously Theoden and Gandalf, and then obviously the reveal of Gandalf the White, the extraction of the poison, if you will, and that little fist fight. I love that little fist fight with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas just beating the crap out of all of Rohan, basically, while Gandalf really dramatically walks. He could have hurried it up a bit, but no, he has to dramatically pose and walk along the corridor. I love it. It's fantastic.
He's like, the power of Christ compels you.
Basically, yeah. You have no power here. And there's so many good moments in that scene that are just so fantastic. Again, I cannot remember the actor's name, but the actor who plays Theoden is absolutely
Bernard Hill,
yeah, absolutely brilliant. His little laugh, he's like, it's just so good. Like I love that sequence, and
the makeup's tremendous as well on old. That makes him look really old, and you have that even still that fantastic effect where he
that transformation. I watched like a long video that I won't go into here on like how they actually managed to do that effects, and it's very simple in effects, but they just nailed it. And obviously, like you can see that physical corruption of Saruman. And it is a wonderful way of setting up that Gandalf is now he's now the big wizard. Saruman ain't shit. Now it's all about Gandalf, and again that's setting up that sort of power crisis, and then this and immediately sets up like the interactions between Aragorn and Éowyn as well, sort of like Aragorn holding her back, and that sort of that relationship that then builds on that. I just think all those characters are brilliant. Theoden in particular, one of my favorite scenes in this film and the trilogy. I don't know if it's an extended cut scene. It feels like it probably might have been one, but it's when he's like standing over the grave of Theodred, and he's talking about like no father should ever bury their son.
No, that's in the theatrical. That's in the theatrical.
Oh, that is in the okay. Good.
The funeral scene isn't where Éowyn sings. That's extended edition, but the scene afterwards.
I love that scene because I think the delivery was absolutely perfect. If memory serves, I believe the actor who played Theoden, what was his name? Rowan Hill, did you say?
Bernard Hill. Yeah.
Bernard Hill. Thank you. Yeah. I believe he'd actually suffered the loss of a loved one very recently prior to filming that scene, and like the palpable emotion that he delivers in that scene is just it's honestly it brings a tear to my eye. It's genuinely stunning. Just like that he is just absolutely devastated at the loss of his son and what his reliance on Grima and those characters have done to them. I think it's such a fantastic introduction to this different side of men that we've seen. We've seen Gondor and they're like sort of stoic, prim and proper kind of way of doing things. You get this sort of more rough and tumble characters in Rohan. It's my favorite region. I love everything about Rohan. And I think it's just such an amazing introduction to all those characters.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I've been speaking for so long. Then
no, you're good, man. I know. I was getting misty just thinking about that scene. No parent should have to bury his own child. What I love about it, and this is more of a discussion, I guess, for Return of the King, but the setup for it is within this film. I love the parallels that you can draw between Denethor as a leader of people, and Theoden, and
Yeah.
how both of them start in a very similar place, how they've kind of been corrupted, they're overcome by darkness and the sense of futility, but then one rises above that and one chooses to just sink deeper into that.
Yeah.
And I love how they start from that same place. It's very different in the film, and I think I like how it's the subtlety that it's handled in the book compared to the film. With the film, they make it a full-blown exorcism that Saruman has, possessed King Theoden. And I don't know how people in court would go, well, hang on a minute, Bernard Hill, you look like a 40 to 50-year-old man yesterday, and now you look like you're in your hundreds. Like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah.
and then, like, he de-ages, and it's very weird.
Yeah.
Whereas in the books, it's much more subtle that through the corrupting power of words and actions of Grima, the poison essentially has been dripped into Grima from Saruman, which is then being passed on to Theoden, that has made him demoralized and weak and frail and very passive. And then he overcomes that. Whereas in the film, it's taking that to a much bigger degree of extreme, I think, having it actually be possession. I think it works for the film, don't get me wrong. I love what they do.
I do agree. It's a little bit silly. But I think it's just a much more easy way to get that across.
It's visual,
It's a case of like Saruman via Grima has made Theoden weak is a really easy way of just showing that visually, as opposed to Denethor, where it's, like you say, because of the differences between the two characters. With Theoden King, that's really a very small part of his character. That's just the introduction to his character. He gets over it, and they crack on with the more interesting part, which is the fact that now, faced with the fact that his kingdom is in disrepair, it is in ruin, and they are coming, what does he now do to protect his people? That's the sort of more interesting side. That's the more interesting conflict. So they focus on that more. Whereas with Denethor, his corruption, and his inability to help his people for his own selfish reasons is a lot more central to the character, so they can devote that much more time to it. So I think it's a much more easy way to get that across visually to the audience, to let them to understand it a lot more quicker.
And there are some cool moments that do come of that, filmically as well. Like, if I go, Theoden dies. Like, that bit's cool. And I love the bit where Gandalf does the final spell, and you see like Saruman get smacked out and kind of skid over the floor back in Orthanc. It's really, really cool. And I've seen a lot of people be very critical of King Theoden's character, specifically with this film, but kind of overall. How Aragorn has to kind of take up that leadership, which Theoden even mentions in Return of the King. It was not Theoden of Rohan that led the people to victory, inferring that it was Aragorn.
Last time I checked, it was Theoden of Rohan Theoden who led Rohan, not Aragorn or something like that.
Exactly. But I like that it shows that futility, and I think that's absolutely necessary. It's a wonderful character arc for him, and it's a very real depiction, I think. He's been out of the game for so long through the corruption of Saruman and Grima that he is thrust into this situation, and inherently he is just doing what he feels is best for his people. You can understand that he might not want to rush to war. He's got us. Let's get them fortified. Let's get them in a safe place. He is a little bit arrogant in some ways. He's, well, no one's ever breached the Deeping Wall. He's like, is this it? Is this all you can conjure, Saruman? He kind of laughs
to his credit, can anyone predict that Saruman is going to invent guns?
Exactly.
That's what he does. Credit to Theoden King here. The man is doing what has worked for his ancestors time and time again, and I absolutely share his reservations with the idea that he's just had four people rock up to his house. One of them's a wizard, one of them's an elf, one of them's a dwarf, and they've done him a solid, but they are essentially being led by the future kings of Gondor. So he can probably be a little bit concerned that perhaps Gondor is trying to play him a fool here and has his own sort of monarchy and his own sort of systems of power, and he doesn't really want Gondor to encroach on that. And like Aragorn saying, hey, take to the field, kill all these orcs on the field, because that's where you're going to be good. You might think Gondor historically has not had Rohan's best interest at heart. There's no real reason for him to believe that this new Lord of Gondor is any different. I totally understand why he's done the reasons that he did. They all make perfect sense. And I think he has that moment of redemption in Return of the King, obviously, when 100%. The beacons are lit and Rohan will answer.
Yeah, and I like sort of the elements of that Anglo-Saxon culture. I mean, that is fundamentally what Tolkien based the culture of Rohan on.
Yeah,
You know, Eowyn's song is sung in Old English,
yeah,
the language. I love how they built all those like thatched roofs, thatched cottages on top of I think it's called Mount Sunday. I think it's called in New Zealand. It took them 6 months to build. It's
yeah.
just that wonder. Now that would just be CGI on top of a mountain,
Oh,
probably. The
absolutely,
fact
yeah.
that they actually built those is just wonderful. But I love that element, you know, even before the battle even takes place, and Aragorn's having that exchange with Theoden, and Theoden's like, if this is to be their end, then I will have them make such an end as to be worthy of
Yeah,
remembrance. And even at the end where Aragorn's saying, ride out and meet them,
yeah,
his first go-to is for death and glory. It is that very
yeah.
Anglo-Saxon, the glory and death in battle, you know, fighting to the bitter
Yeah,
end.
and you see that as well in Return of the King, obviously, with the charge of the Rohirrim, where their charge is just death. That's
Yeah, they
what
don't
they
care. They're
scream.
just like,
That's what they
we
scream as they
embrace it.
charge.
Yeah.
It's that Anglo-Saxon, that almost even that almost like Scandinavian Viking sort of
Yeah.
thing. And you see that in their armor as well, with like the traditional Viking helms and the riding swords and all the rest of it. I love the
Mhm.
aesthetics of Rohan. I think it's absolutely stunning, and like the way they are just willing to give absolutely everything for like their cause. I don't want
Mhm.
to talk too much about like the stuff at Helm's Deep because I don't, because obviously we've got a whole section
Oh,
dedicated
yeah,
to
we
that
have.
shortly. But like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
love the
yeah.
I love everything surrounding Rohan, and that introduction. Everything in Edoras is absolutely brilliant. I think they introduced the characters and set up the reasons why they are the way they are so much. And then obviously the departure of Gandalf, the setup of Aragorn as like being very kingly, and because a lot of the criticisms you do see is obviously that Aragorn is leading them most of the time as opposed to Theoden. But it's also really the first time we get to see Aragorn lead. Yeah, we get to see him lead Gimli and Legolas. That doesn't really count. They're his mates. Like, you get to see him now lead these people. You get to see Aragorn's talent as a leader, and especially in the film version of Aragorn, the fact that he is reluctant to take command.
Mhm.
It's a really huge moment for him to take command of the situation and to be able to command these troops and lead these people to safety and all the rest of it. And I think that's such a wonderful addition. And obviously, you that loss that you feel is so palpable when he's then taken off the cliff by Sharku and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
Um,
And that's a
and you
great
think,
action set piece too, like
I
not
love
from
those
the
things.
book at all.
No,
The
like not in the
warg
book.
scene, but I think that it still holds up
Yeah,
visually. I think the effects,
absolutely.
they look like real creatures in some
Yeah,
shots. I still defy that. Like it's absolutely wonderful. Some people could argue that, oh, it's just action for action's sake, like it's not in the book, but I think the film needed an action beat at that
yeah.
part in the
It needs
film,
to
and it's
break it up a
something
little bit.
unique and different, and it's intense. You feel the impact when you get that wonderful pan where it's like looking at the army of the Rohirrim, looking at the army of the wargs, and they're getting close, and then boom, and they collide in
Yeah.
the middle. You really feel the impact of that every single time I watch it.
I think it also massively adds to sort of the desperation that you feel when they get to Helm's Deep. Because if they just get to Helm's Deep and like they haven't been attacked, they're all absolutely fine. It's a case of then why are the walls so undermanned? Why are you in
Yeah.
such difficulty? I know you've lost the riders, but like you've still got most of your troops. So why is it the case that you are so understaffed? And it's because half their units got taken out by this attack of the wargs on the way there,
Mhm.
this suicide run of these orcs, just to try and delay them and sort of destroy them. And it's why then you have to sort of draft the men, the children, everyone into sort of service in Helm's Deep, and it adds to the sort of effect of that moment. And there are these wonderful, touching moments as well. Obviously, like with the two children that flee the burning village, reuniting with their mother when they get to Helm's Deep and stuff like that, which very corny, I
I
know,
don't
but
like
like
the fact they get reunited. I think that element would have had so much more impact
if
if,
they
like,
get there
she
and
knew
she's
that
not
she was going
there,
to die in
yeah.
that attack, but she let her children
Which is,
go. Yeah.
which to be fair, is implied, but it's one of those situations where like, whatever, it's fine. I get you need a bit of levity in that situation. It's
Mhm.
nice to sort of see that because the whole Helm's Deep sequence, less so in the films than the books, is just really bleak. It's a
Mhm.
really bleak setting. It's a case of like there is no way out. They're in there until they die or they win, and it looks like for the majority of that fight they are going to die. And again, it obviously comes down to that final charge and Gandalf and the rest of it. But
Mhm.
I think having those little moments of humanity is actually really necessary, which I really enjoy.
Yeah. I'm going to really quickly fire through some of these other characters. So I know we need to talk about Helm's Deep and the music as well, which is going to be a massive section. Aemir, I absolutely love. I love his
Carl Urban.
armor. Oh, that like horse mane kind of thing that he's got going on in his armor. Really cool. I love the way that Carl Urban plays it too. My favorite scene with Aemir, I'm going to wait until we talk about Helm's Deep. I think it was a masterful decision to eliminate the character of Erkenbrand, replace that character with Aemir. It just gave a much more. It just makes more sense to me. Even when I read the Lord of the Rings book, granted I watched the films first, I'm like, no, it should be Éomer. Like it just works.
Yeah,
so
no, it
much
makes perfect
better.
sense as well. Yeah.
And Grimer, I want to talk about him first. I'm going to save Éowyn until last because I wanted to talk about some of the deleted scenes with the films as well, and a completely different portrayal we could have had as Éowyn. Brad Dourif is one of my favorite character actors of all time. The man is wonderful and so memorable in every single role that he's in.
He's so delightfully slimy as Grimer or whatever how it's pronounced. He's wonderful. Just like everything, every time he moves and speaks to anything, it just makes your skin crawl, and it's very, very effective.
It's even just like the little mannerisms, the little tweaks the character has. I love how he's there, like with a little handkerchief, and he's like the slightest of dabs to like that corner of blood in his mouth is just like very slimy. And then obviously he becomes Saruman's lackey as it goes on, and certainly into Return of the King. But that monologue that he has with Éowyn is easily one of my favorites out of the whole trilogy. It's just that beautiful poetic language that, again, taking Tolkien's words and even the rest of the screenplay around it has that similar kind of sound to it. I talked about the screenplay last time, how they can bring more filmic, sort of more contemporary kind of way of talking, I guess, but they can utilize it and work it around Tolkien's framework, which I think is absolutely masterful. But yeah, no, I love Grimer's character. Yeah, Grimer,
whichever it is. Either way, it's excellent. And again, that scene with him and Éowyn is a great way to characterize Éowyn's character as well, because it clearly shows that, like, despite the fact that Grimer is established as this master of words, he literally uses his words to poison and possess a king. Éowyn is just like, nah, mate, no chance. Goodbye. On your bike, mate.
And I like some of the implied things as well, like when Theodred dies and he kind of rounds the corner of the room and go, oh, he must have died sometime during the night. I've always wondered, did Grimer finish him off?
Finish the job,
like that, it's never said in the films. I don't even think it's said in the book, but if that was the case, that's a really cool angle to the character. I alluded last week that there's sort of like, there's so many quotable lines from these films. We've talked about some, keep breathing, taking the hobbits to Isengard, whatever it happens to be. But one that, weirdly enough, I find that I quote the most times out of any is a line from Grima Wormtongue in this. And it's where he goes, late is the hour in which this conjurer chooses to appear. Anyone who shows up late or something, I always go to that line. I don't know why, because I don't think many people do. But it's such a great line. There's so many good, like, memeable lines or anything from this.
Yeah, I love the gross Grimer in the throne room and like the a good question, sir, and like he plays the sniveling like lackey so beautifully. Yeah, absolutely perfect.
We've got a great comment here from Byvar. I can't believe I forgot this as well. The scene where he recognizes what he has done after he sees the Uruk-hai army is great. The tear that runs down his cheeks. Yeah, one of my favorite bits as well is where he's like, "How can fire undo stone?" And then
he holds the candle over it. I was like, "Back off!" Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And yeah, that reaction there. I don't know if it's a. You could argue that it's a tear of regret of what it's done.
And they head outside, and
what a beautiful reveal that is as well. You know, that like horn, absolutely chilling. I don't know if it's a tear like I'm regretful of what I've done, or if he's genuinely gobsmacked in awe that it's just like a tear. I think you can interpret it either way. I want to talk about Éowyn quickly. You mentioned that a lot of people are negative of character. I must admit, I'm kind of one of them a little bit, mostly from her handling in this film. Now, I don't have a problem with them dialing up the love triangle aspect because that is in the book. Like, she is infatuated with Aragorn for a lot of it, but I think she arrives at that point very quickly. She comes across as very full on in this film. There's the extended scene where she's like, the people will not be parted from you because they love you. And I'm like, you've known each other for like a week. Like, calm down.
Yeah, but Viggo Mortensen looked pretty hot, so I can allow it.
And I've seen some people
the man
say
rhymes it well.
Yeah,
He's
he
never
like
looked better than when he got stabbed in like the chest and fell off a cliff. That's honestly peak attractiveness of Viggo Mortensen, and not many people can pull that off.
he stinks of horse probably. That scene where he opens the
The
double doors
doors,
in
yeah,
slow
honestly.
motion.
Like,
That's a
I'm a
man's
straight
man.
I'm a straight man, but like that does something
Oh
for me.
yeah. Yeah. There's a fire in our in our loins during that scene, certainly. But I don't know, she comes across as a little bit simpering in this film for me.
Yeah, and I
Just ever
get
so
that, but
slightly.
I think that's part of the character. I think that adds to sort of the way that she acts, and it makes that sort of the journey that she goes on all the more meaningful, because obviously like she's introduced as this like damsel in distress character again, but then the sort of her journey of going from this damsel in distress, this simpering love struck teen, to being like the woman that kills the Witch King. Spoilers. Is just like, it's so good, and it feels so natural as well. Sort of this progression of her, like her falling for Aragorn, realizing that it's never going to happen, and realizing that she needs to take charge of her own life, and that sort of direction, I think, is handled really well. Don't get me wrong, I think a character is handled far better in Return of the King than Two Towers, but I think the Two Towers is necessary to set up that development further down the line, because otherwise she's introduced as this princess that is also good with the sword, and then later she uses the sword to kill the Witch King, and like that's cool, I guess, but like it's not a very there's no character arc, and this
Yeah.
gives her a bit more development, I think. It's
Yeah,
starting her off. It's starting her off from a lower point, but it makes the journey that much more satisfying.
and there are some great bits of dialogue in there as well. It's like, "What do you fear, my lady? A cage to stay behind bars
Yeah,
until use or old age accept them." Beautifully kind of like frames the character. I think another aspect why I kind of don't like a character. This is some of the behind the scenes stuff in Return of the
yeah,
King. I might be way off base in this, but and I've met her in real life. She is absolutely wonderful. She's lovely, wonderful human being, very personable, but in the Return of the King special feature, she talks about the filming process of that fight with the Witch King, right?
yeah,
And the guy who played Lurtz plays many characters across the trilogy. He
yeah,
plays Gothmog, and he also played the Witch King.
yeah,
And that poor guy is just lugging this huge goddamn Morning Star around trying to
yeah,
hit her. And, Peter Jackson he's like Kubrick. He's like, no, we've got to do another take, more
yeah.
intensity and everything like that. They were filming all day, and she mentions that she started crying, and it's almost like the kind of waft in the face, like, I can't, it's too difficult. I'm like,
Yeah.
you are getting paid God knows how much money to star in the most perfect film trilogy of all time. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I would have cleaned the public toilets on that set just for a chance to be on the set of Lord of the Rings. You're here to do a job. Stop complaining about it and crying like,
Yeah, but it's a very hard job, Chris. I understand exactly what you're saying. Acting's really difficult.
The poor guy
Okay,
isn't crying. Who's swinging the goddamn?
he might be. He's got a mask on. You can't see.
So I don't know. I always saw that behind the scenes. I was like, "Oh, come on, you're just laying it on
No, I
thick."
mean, like you see
And
that
that
like
translated into the character of Eowyn for me a little
this is a
bit.
bit of a segue, but obviously, like, but Tom Holland had like a recent conversation, I think, on Graham Norton, talking about how he was complaining about like his day at work as Spider-Man and stuff like that, and his brother took the mick out of him. So he invited his brother on set. He got his brother to play a scene, and at the end of it, his brother was like, "Yeah, I could not do that every day because acting really hard, especially in these very physical roles. Like, yeah, I know she basically she dodges a bit and does that, but you do that like 30 times a day, that's going to start to like add up, and it's going to
Mhm.
start to really sort of tear into you. So I don't think that's really a fair criticism of her character, or
I wonder if
really
it was like a Shelley
role.
Duvall effect from The Shining. That scene in the staircase, and she had to
Yeah,
do like 130 takes of that or something. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. But one thing that I'm very glad they eliminated, because this would have completely changed everything for me and would have taken so much out of the context of these characters. There was a bunch of stuff that was filmed with Eowyn in the Glittering Caves, where she's having
yeah,
to stay with the women and children during Helm's Deep, where the Uruk-hai break through into the Glittering Caves, and she starts to fight back, and she's an
yeah,
accomplished swordswoman, and she kills a bunch of Uruk-hai and saves the women and children from the Uruk-hai. I'm so glad they eliminated
yeah.
that
I agree.
stuff, because that would have immediately taken away from the moment, which is the moment where that should happen come Return of the King.
Yeah,
And another thing as well is the character of Arwen, who we haven't really talked about all that much in this, because there's so many characters to talk about. But I love how they tap into the appendices when it comes to Arwen, and we get to
yeah,
see more of her inner turmoil and the conflict that's going on between her and her father. And does she leave with the people, with her people, into the west, or does she stay for her love? All of that stuff's in the appendices. And when I was recently reading the appendices for the first time, there's a bunch of lines in there. One of my favorite scenes in the film is Elrond's monologue to Arwen.
yeah,
about should Aragorn die. I'm just going to read a little bit here because it's wonderful. He will come to death, an image of the splendor of the kings of men in glory, undimmed before the breaking of the world. But you, my daughter, you will linger on in darkness and in doubt as nightfall in winter that comes without a star. That is
I'm not saying you're a bad actor, Chris, but you didn't quite deliver that.
No, I can't. Only Hugo Weaving can Hugo Weaving. But all of that is from the appendices, and it blew my mind that they actually mined some of that stuff too. And again, to time with the character of Arwen, they did originally shoot a bunch of scenes where Arwen and Elrond went to Galadriel, and I think they kind of utilized some of the footage where Galadriel has that telepathic conversation with Elrond. I think they kind of reworked the material into that. Both of them visit there, and then she tags along with the elven host that goes to Helm's Deep in order to fight alongside Aragorn.
Really?
And there is footage out there where they're on set for Helm's Deep, where they shot the Arwen stuff. I think for any eagle-eyed viewers, I think there are still some shots within the film where if you're looking carefully, you can see Liv Tyler's character of Arwen still on set there. So glad they got rid of that. I think there was
glad. I've never heard that, and that would have been awful.
There was massive fan backlash at the time when it started to leak out, and obviously they eliminated it. But even from then, that was an immediate decision on Peter Jackson, Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh that they then thought about and went, "Oh, hang on, that's a bad idea." Cut to The Hobbit, where they don't have times to second guess themselves. They would come up with those immediate decisions, and I think you can see a lot of parallels maybe as to what became with Toriel and her handlement there. Very different, because I know that Toriel was an original character created specifically for Hobbit films compared to Arwen, but that would have dismantled Arwen's character for me if they'd have chosen to go that route as well.
Absolutely, no, I'm very glad they didn't.
Should we talk music then? Let's do music.
Let's talk music, yeah. There isn't a lot I want to say on this, to be fair. But I think the stuff I do want to say is very important. That is just the music of Rohan. That is my favorite music in any film of any ever. It's absolutely stunning. Just the music as they sort of come into it, as a swooping, it's just so good, and it just sets the tone, the majesty of that landscape, the plains and the horses and that whole aesthetic. Like, you could play that one song with no visuals, and you'd probably still get a good sense of what sort of people those were and the idea of what they're all about. And it's just so absolutely wonderful. It's so breathtaking. Then obviously you have all the mystical sort of music with Fangorn and that side of things. You have a lot of the music, I think, is very underrated in Sam and Frodo's section as well, which is still very, very good indeed. The Black Gate sequence, I think, is wonderful with the music there, and like the rhythmic pounding of the drums and all the rest of it. Really, really good. Yeah, there are honestly so many little moments that I absolutely adore in the music, and these motifs that come through again and again and again, like you were talking about with like the Wrath of Nature or whatever it was called, and then that sort of overlaid with the Rohan theme as the Rohirrim charge in Return of the King, and these little moments of sort of piecing these bits of music together. I don't understand how Howard Shore was able to create so many pieces of music that are so distinct. Like, I could hear one little bit and I know, oh, it's a Gondor bit, oh, it's a Fangorn bit, oh, it's a Rivendell bit. But then when you play them together, they line up so beautifully. It's like, oh, it's both. It's Gondor and Rohan. They're combining and it works. I don't know how he did it. The man is a magician. But it's just so wonderful to see these bits of music sort of playing out together. The last bit of music I want to touch on as well is the music of the elves at Helm's Deep. Love that. Absolutely brilliant. Like,
when that kicks in.
I just love it, because it's like, oh, there's people arriving, like, who are these people? There's no more people. The whole gang's here, and then it's the elves of Lothlorien. You have the Lothlorien music playing, but it's more militaristic, and oh, it's so good.
They are the Lothlorien elves, aren't they? Because I am still confused, because I know it's the Lothlorien theme, but when he says like, "I bring word of Elrond of Rivendell," I'm like, because they're kind of dressed like the elves from Rivendell in like
I don't know. I actually don't know. I always assumed it was Lothlorien elves.
I think it's
because Haldir's in command, so that would make sense to me.
And that's such a cool, and that's why I get it. And it would have been perfect if you just have the people of Rohan making a last ditch stand, like the 300 or so men that they have.
Yeah.
But I like how they tie it in as well. It's like, many years ago, our people fought and died together. We come to honor that allegiance, and it goes back to the last alliance.
Yeah, again, yeah.
I like that element to it.
I do agree that it portrays. They just portrayed Tolkien's vision, and every time I watch this with my dad, every single time he goes, "There were no elves at Helm's Deep," and he gets annoyed every single time, and I get it. But like, it's awesome, and I'm okay with it.
I mean, they were off fighting their own battles, weren't they? The elves, like
Basically,
in
yeah,
Dol
they give them a
Guldur and
wall, and
Mirkwood.
Aragorn chills with them, and then everyone else, Rohan does the other bit. Okay, I
Haldir
think
is
that
one of my fan
I love
favorite
Haldir.
characters as
Yeah,
well. You know, a guy that doesn't really get many scenes, but I love that embrace that Aragorn gives him at the beginning.
yeah, he's so happy to see him.
And
Yeah,
the
I
death
love
scene,
that.
like I feel it when Haldir dies, that music kicks in. It's sad, and he's a
Yeah,
character that we don't know loads about, but
absolutely.
he still has an
I've got a
impact.
trivia question for you, Chris. Who kills the orc that kills Haldir?
Who kills the orc that kills
Yeah,
Haldir?
do you know?
Um, well, he gets slashed from behind, and then Aragorn punches the orc in the face and goes over the ladder. But I don't remember one specifically killing that orc that made the killing blow.
The orc, the killer of the orc that kills Haldir is Haldir because he gets stabbed in the back and he just turns around and cuts the guy in half. Like,
Oh, does he? Oh, wow. Okay.
so he gets stabbed like 3 times, but the first blow that in my mind is the killing blow. Haldir kills that orc and he gets stabbed again, and then Aragorn comes in and like tries to pull them off and all the rest of it. But yeah, so Haldir is another one of them who just refuses to. It's another Boromir moment in my mind where he just refuses to go down, and that's such a cool moment of like him just staying on his feet even after he's already dead. He knows that at this point, but he's just willing to fight to the very last ounce of strength that he has. And I love that moment with Haldir.
He's so distinct with the red cape as well.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's really cool look to the character. Oh god, the music. Gee, I know I've just that's not good. Let's put that back in there. I'm going to bring up actually the first comment of the stream that we had at 4:30. Yanis says, "Oh man, the music. I love the Rohan theme." He mentions the violin. I think it was like a Norwegian fiddle again, tying in with that Anglo-Saxon kind of feel to it as well. That very folk kind of sense of things. It's a phenomenal soundtrack. I mean, all of them are as just like a collective piece, but from Foundations of Stone at the beginning, where we get that Moria reprise as he's falling down with the Balrog, which is one of my favorite scenes. One of my favorite bits of music, obviously Rohan speaks for itself, and I love how the phrasing on the Rohan theme, similar with the Gondor theme, once we get to Return of the King, you can play it in like a slow, somber, melancholic way, but then you can also dial it up, and it's an incredible like action, rousing theme behind it, and the different applications that you can do with that one theme. One of my favorite bits of music is it's called, I think on the complete recordings, it's called One of the Dunedain / Even Star, but it's specifically the Even Star section, and it plays over that Elrond monologue. It's a wonderful bit of music. Just gets me emotional every single time that I read it, that I listen to it. And I really like the music. I think it's called Samwise the Brave, and it plays over Sam's speech at the very end of the film.
Yes, I think it's about that. Yeah,
it's kind of like Breaking of the Fellowship again.
Yeah, and it's a bit of the Shire theme creeping in. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, I love that scene. I forgot about that scene actually. I keep forgetting about that scene. It's a fantastic scene, which is right at the end of the film. Yeah, no, I keep. Yeah, that is a wonderful bit of music actually.
And then the end credit song as well. So we say goodbye to Enya, who provided the end credit song for the first one, and we have Emiliana Torini, I think she's called, Gollum's song. I like how that theme is utilized throughout the film for Gollum's character as well. And it's this really just heartbreaking, longing song. Just really haunting and melancholic to listen to. It's wonderful. I think originally they tried to get is it Bjork? Is that the name of the singer, the Icelandic singer? Very unique voice, and you can hear the singer in this very similar voice to Bjork.
Trying to go for that same kind of feel.
So it feels, I'm not taking anything away from her because she did a wonderful performance for this song. It almost feels like they got discount Bjork to do the song a little bit.
I can see what you're saying.
It's out of the three, it's probably the one that I listen to the least out of May It Be, this and Into the West. But it serves the film so wonderfully. And when you get the first few opening bars of that kick in, that final shot of the film where we pan up over the rocks and you get that still shot of Mordor.
That's
fell beasts flying around. Fade to black. I remember seeing that for the first time, and it hits you with that cliffhanger. And he's like, "We could let her do it. Yes, she could do it." I'm like, "Who's her?"
Yeah,
Who's
exactly.
she? And then it
again,
ends.
One of my favorite decisions of Peter Jackson to not include the Shelob sequence in the Two Towers in Return of the King, I think is absolutely brilliant because the amount that actually happens before we get to Shelob in Return of the King is quite significant. You have all of the betrayal of Frodo and Sam and that sort of thing in the whole Shelob sequence itself, which I think is just wonderful. Just Minas Morgul as a location, and all of it. Yeah,
It
so
would
I
have been a
think that was a
very
fantastic.
overstuffed movie, I think, if they'd have packed all that stuff into there.
Yeah,
I do love the ending of the book and the cliffhanger that the book
yeah,
leaves off, where Sam's pursuing, Frodo's captors, and they
yeah.
close the doors, and he's trying to get in, and it says like Frodo was alive, but he was taken by the dark forces, or so. I can't
So
remember the
yeah,
last line of the
it's
book.
something along those lines.
But yeah, the soundtrack just again
Yeah,
11 out of
absolutely.
10, 20 out of
My
10.
favorite of
Like
the
just
trilogy, and entirely because of the Rohan theme, because it's just stunning.
yeah. I guess Helm's Deep.
That's it. We're into it now.
We're
Okay.
coming up to 2 hours, so we'll breeze through it as quick as we can. But Helm's Deep is such a chunk of a section, isn't it? Like, where do we
Yeah, I
start?
mean, when people think about Lord of the Rings, there are some of those things that are just universally like you think of very quickly. You got the Balrog from the first one, You Shall Not Pass, all the rest of it. You've got the Army of the Dead and Minas Tirith in general. In the second one, the Charge of Osgiliath, I think, a fantastic sequence. But the thing that whenever I've had a few drinks at the pub with my friends and we start talking about Lord of the Rings, the thing that we'll talk about more than anything else is always and will always be the Battle of Helm's Deep, because it
Nice.
is, again, I say, will always be the greatest large scale battle of all time.
Mhm.
Like, okay, the bit in Endgame when all the people come at the portals, that's pretty cool. You're not Helm's Deep though.
Yeah.
Okay, Game of Thrones with the bit where the Wild Wars, like they marketed that as the better than Helm's Deep. That's how they marketed. Like the battle you will see in this episode is better than Helm's Deep. First of all, couldn't even see your
Oh, you're
episode.
talking
Fix
about
your
that one.
lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There was the Battle of the
and
Bastards as well. I remember they were saying that
I
this is
did.
going to be better than
I did
Helm's
love
Deep.
Battle of the Bastards, to be fair.
Yeah, me too.
But it's not as good as Helm's Deep, and
Agreed.
nothing ever will be, because it is the Battle of Helm's Deep, and it is just breathtaking. The way the build up to it as well. Like, I'm going to start this from like the arrival at Helm's Deep. You see all these people crammed in. The sense of Theoden realizing the mistake that he's made and how understaffed they are and how they can't even man the walls, let alone like defend against this massive army that Sauron has created. And then just these little build-ups and these little, you can already see the cracks begin to form, and the pressure and the paranoia and all the rest of it. I think it's wonderful, and it is my only criticism of the film is that Helm's Deep is too short. I don't mean that in terms of runtime, because it does take up a significant chunk of the film, but I mean in terms of actually in the timings of the battle itself. In the film, it's one night, and they're fighting for like 2 hours or whatever. In the books, I believe it's 5 nights.
Mhm.
That they are 5 days and 5 nights, and that's part of the reason of Gandalf's return being so. Thing is, because it wasn't a case of like they were being overwhelmed by the Uruk-hai. They absolutely were, but they were just exhausted. They hadn't slept properly in 5 nights. They've been fighting there. Legolas had run out of arrows. That was that was something that always stuck out to me, is the fact that they're shooting down off these walls. You have Legolas, the best archer of all time, or whatever, and he can't do anything because he doesn't have any arrows left. Like, that's the degree of desperation that we're getting to. They could not fight back. They didn't have anything to fight back with. And they have little moments like that. I love the little scene of Aragorn chatting to Harris, son of Harim, or whatever his name was, with the clearly absolutely awful sword made out of pig iron. And he's a little swing thing. He's like, this is a good sword. Bullshit in that kid, so he knows that child is going to die, but he's trying to get him to his best. And like those little moments to show how understaffed they are, how little equipment they have. You have the argument between Aragorn and Legolas, in which Aragorn just bursts out in non-Elvish, saying that I will die as one of them. Dick move, Aragorn, but we're right.
Yeah, it is.
Massively, because he just leaves as well, leaving Legolas alone with like 50 of these Rohan people after just implying that Legolas said they're all going to die. I'm like,
Looking
yeah,
for an
cheers,
exit,
Aragorn.
yeah.
Nice, mate. Yeah, appreciate it. But yeah, you can see those wonderful bits of paranoia are absolutely brilliant, and then obviously that feeds into the spectacle. They have the little suit, where they're putting on the chain shirts and they're getting like ready to battle. And you see Aragorn dressed as like a soldier, not as a ranger, and the same with like Legolas and Gimli and the rest of them. I love those little. I honestly think the build up to Helm's Deep is arguably better than the fight itself.
Agreed.
Especially the sequence where they're standing on the wall and it begins to rain and Theoden just goes, so it begins. And they have the horn and it's so good.
Yeah. Oh my God. Where do I start with Helm's Deep?
Yeah.
You're right there in that the battle wouldn't have anywhere near the effect it does if it didn't have that setup.
Yeah.
And that epic build to it, that sense of looming dread, and that really comes across in the filmmaking. One of my favorite scenes is the poem that Theoden recites is like, "Where is the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing?" and you have the scenes of, you know, like the children having to be pulled out from their mother's arms,
Yeah,
and
they're
like
crying, and like they're putting the helmet on that's too big for him and stuff like that. Like, it
that
just
one that's like
shows that
handed the
desperation.
axe, and it kind of looks at it like, what is an axe? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's absolutely horrible. And yeah, when the battle actually does happen, and you have that really distant marching, and everything's quiet, and you might
Yeah.
hear like a wooden sort of like ramp kind of fall down
Yeah.
and smack against the stone. Everything from that to the first raindrop, and like that ting 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 ting, like
Yeah.
on the armor when it hits, beautiful sound design. And like, I remember the tension. You were gearing up for something big at that point. The slamming of the spears, almost like
Yeah.
Zulu warrior kind of things, you know, the intimidation tactic.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And just like the fact that whenever I watch this battle scene, and I talk about the Lord of the Rings in general, like, I don't know how anyone could have made this. Like,
Yeah.
it's completely out of the realm of possibility for me. The whole Battle of Helm's Deep, just that alone, is immense. I think it was like 3 months. Was it like 3 to 5 months of nighttime shooting, 500 extras, you know, people in makeup. It's absolutely incredible. And then once the battle actually starts, I mean, there are video essays on this battle alone and why it could be one of the
and
best.
for good reason. Yeah.
It's just like the different stages, the different set pieces, the different obstacles that are like built across. It's almost like little mini missions. It builds into like the battle overall. It's like, right, we've got to, you know, defend the causeway, and it's like, oh, now we've got to brace the gate, now we've got to flee, and it's all these moments. And
it feels like a video game where you have these different objectives that you have to fulfill one after the other. In fact, obviously there are many Lord of the Rings video games. I believe all of them, when they have Helm's Deep, literally have those objectives. Okay, first defend the gates. The gates are fallen, fall back, defend the walls. That's fine. You have to keep. I love that sort of sequential feel of it all. You were talking about the tension, and one of my favorite parts is how they break the tension. Of obviously you have the chanting, and like they're all, and everyone's like, okay, I don't know, I'm just sitting there with like bated breath, just like holding my breath, like, I don't know what's going to happen, and then one of them accidentally fires the arrow, and it kills one of the Uruk-hai, and then just the scream and the tension's broken, the music comes in, and it's just, okay, now we're in it, let's go. I love that. It's absolutely brilliant.
And the fact that they utilize miniatures and bigatures as well, that they call them, like, is it like 1 to 50 scale or something, 1 to 35 like scale? I can't remember what it is. The shot, like the behind the scenes where you see the guy bringing up the ladders, and then they would have digitally have removed him from the shot, and it's all that sort of like tangible quality to everything as well. One of my favorite bits of the battle is the giant ladder that's like coming up, like the ladder to end all ladders. Legolas hits it, and I remember that on the big screen for the first time, and that goes down. You've got the scale of the screen. It like feels like you're almost on the walls of Helm's Deep as well. I can't say enough positive things about this battle. I don't even know where you start talking about this battle.
No,
but they pepper like the comic relief in as well. You know, you've got the payoff as well. Toss me. I cannot jump the distance. You have to toss me. You've got that in there.
Don't tell the elf. And,
the
all the
kill
rest
count. It's wonderful. Like we talked about the skateboard scene. I love it. I love it. I don't have a problem with it at all.
No.
And then
I want to talk briefly about the Berserker charge as well, to sort of like set off the bomb, because I thought that was done so well. Because like you know obviously that Saruman's plan has got a little grate. They've already discussed it. They've shown it what's going to happen, and you see it. You have the orcs have made a little pathway. You see this absolutely jacked guy running through the little, like, no armor on, just like this one. I love this sparkling torch as well. It's like a proper like detonator's torch, not like a. It's amazing. See, Aragorn notices it. It's like Legolas take him down. He gets shot. It's almost like that sort of parallel of Boromir again. Like, he gets shot 3 times the same way that Boromir does, but this time he makes it all the way through. He gets it on, and then you just see this explosion. And like, I don't know. For me, as a child, I was not prepared for the level of explosion that would be. I thought it would be like, it'll blow a little hole, and then they could sort of get through the hole. No. That blows up the wall. That blows up like half the castle, and like all of a sudden the deeping wall has been breached, and they're flooding through. You have Gimli jumping down then into the water, and again, it has like a different. It changes the feel of the fight entirely. It completely changes the tempo, because before that it was a siege, right? You had them standing on the walls. They were massively in control. They just rain fire down upon them, push off these ladders. There's a few like hairy bits. A few of them got them up, but they were doing fine. And then all of a sudden, that tide changes. It's no longer a case of just hold out for a bit, we'll be fine, and we can outlast them. It's a case of, oh no, they're inside. This has gone from hold out for a couple of days until Gandalf gets here. It's now a case of hold out for literally like minutes. It's now a very immediate threat, and I love that tempo change and the falling back, like you say, the different sort of. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, and it is like the pendulum swings, isn't it? Of as a real battle would go. There's 1 minute where, you know, we have defended the door. This is great. It's like, oh no, now they've got ladders, and like, oh no, now they've got like harpoons that they're launching up. I love that one that hits that one elf. Is it? Like it's like like Wilhelm scream or whatever it is.
Yeah, there's so many little moments.
But I've seen some people say that they dislike the Urukai and kind of like how, you know, they're charging towards the causeway and they've got this sort of Roman formation, like the not the phalanx, is it like the turtle or whatever it was called, where they hold the shields above and at the side of them, and then the Urukai just come charging through with a battering ram. It's like, right, screw this, like we're close enough, and they're like pushing their own troops off the causeway.
Yeah,
that is what the orcs and Urukai
are. Yeah,
like.
absolutely. They don't care about collateral damage.
Yeah. Even the scene where they blow up the wall and then you've got the chunks of rubble that like fall back and crush their own troops. They don't care. They just
the ladders, when they push the ladders off, it flattens their troops. They don't care. The fact the only way for them to destroy the wall was with a suicide bomber. Like they're fine with that. That's their tactics, and that's again what's part of the thing that makes them such a terrifying threat. Because for Rohan, this is a case of this is their entire people, their entire culture. Everything about them is trapped within these walls. So they need as many of those to come out of it alive as possible. Saruman, he'd be happy if just one Urukai was left standing at the end of this, because he doesn't care about his side. All he cares about is beating them, and that's such a terrifying threat to face. This idea that the orcs will absolutely fight down to the last man because they don't care if they live or die. They don't have that level of cognitive reasoning. They are bred to fight, and that's what they'll do. And I love that. I think it's shown brilliantly through their battle tactics, like you said.
And then you've got the wonderful moment at the end with Gandalf where he shows up.
And
I think enough time passes in the film so that when it does hit you with that voiceover of Gandalf again, it instantly reminds you and goes like, oh yeah, because he's been out of the film for so long.
You forget.
You're like, about
Gandalf, he's back, and then
that shot where it's, you know, the distant shot where the horse rears up on its hind legs on the ridge.
And I love the moment before that as well with Theoden and Aragorn, and it's like, ride with me, ride out now, we're gonna die, let's just fucking go for it. And they just ride down, they fucking clear them out, I honestly think that's both of these moments. It just, first of all, it shows the importance of cavalry in warfare, and it massively foreshadows obviously the charge of the Rohirrim in Return of the King, and just how important their military force is. Because, like, despite the fact that they are massively outnumbered, they're basically having the shit kicked out of them in Helm's Deep because they've lost their main advantage, which is the cavalry. They just introduced that briefly. There's like 20 of them, like on the horses that sort of charge out, and they kill like 300 orcs in a matter of seconds. They just fucking plow through them, and you can see, even for just a second, you're like, oh shit, they might do this, and then Gandalf, and it's brilliant. I love that.
And the music, especially in that bit as well, the slow motion, the light that emanates. It's absolutely wonderful.
Can I talk very briefly before we move on about the lighting? The lighting in Helm's Deep is so good.
You can actually see everything that's going on.
Because apparently, allegedly, I'd never spoken to the man myself, but Peter Jackson allegedly claims that he had a conversation with like the set designers and the lighting experts and stuff like that, and they were like, okay, how do you want to do this? He was like, as realistic as possible. We want it like proper realistic. And so they showed him some like the test footage, and you couldn't see shit. And he was like, okay, cool, make it blue. And that's what they did. They just basically added a blue filter over all of it, made it light, but it still feels dark. But you can see everything, and it's done so wonderfully. Is it natural? No, obviously not. Night doesn't look like that. Is it cinematic? Absolutely.
And then you compare that to Game of Thrones, and it's like, well, this might be intense if I could actually see.
I can't see what's going on. It's night and day. It's honestly, I cannot stress how, and again, I know we're running out of time, so I can't really talk much more about it, but I could talk for hours just about how excellent Helm's Deep is, because there are so many little details that are just so fantastic. You get to see Gimli actually being competent, and like, we've said this before, that Gimli is used so much as comic relief, but that one scene, it was like a case of like, okay, we need to clear out the door so we can defend it. What are we going to do? Just send Gimli. He'll sort it out.
Yeah.
No problem. And he fights off like 30 guys. Well, obviously Aragorn helps him, but like they just plow through these people, the two of them, in a massively disadvantageous situation. But they are so confident in the abilities of both these people that you get to just see them destroy that. And again, I could keep going, but like,
do you think it's a little bit too much? Because I've seen that as a criticism with the Hobbit films, you know, where it's like, when Thorin and Dwalin are just like, goblin mercenaries, no more than 100. Oh, shouldn't be a problem. And I'm like, oh, well, that takes the drama out of the scene. But, you know, Aragorn stands up to like 200 Uruk-hai on his own in Fellowship of the Ring initially. In this, you have Gimli and Aragorn that are standing on that causeway, beset by literally hundreds of Uruk-hai. Do you think it strays? I mean, I don't have the same feelings as I do towards The Hobbit with scenes like that, because it feels,
because
I don't know if it's more real or...
It feels earned. You know, I mean, because it's, again, it's been foreshadowed in moments like that. You've seen the Fellowship going toe to toe with this many people. You know, these aren't just normal people. These are as good as it gets. Aragorn is probably the greatest swordsman of all time. Like, don't go some Silmarillion on me, but you know what I mean. Like, he's a fantastic warrior, and the same can say with Gimli. They are two of the greatest warriors of all time. Is it realistic? No, because if we're doing realistic battle tactics, they'd all be very dead very quickly. Because in realistic battle tactics, is you have a shield and a spear, and you step forward really slowly, and that's not cinematic. Nobody ever used a sword in combat back in medieval fighting because that's really stupid. Why would you bother with that? You have a stick. A stick is the best weapon. It's been proven time after time. So no, I have no issue with that because it's fantasy and it's awesome. And shut up, critics.
You got to have some fun with it, right? And Peter Jackson
exactly.
does. Has a little bit too much fun in The Hobbit, but we're not talking about that now. That comes next year.
No, we're not. Exactly.
I guess sort of before we get on to final thoughts, I mean, we've talked a lot of favorite scenes, moments, or quotable lines. Are there any other scenes that come to mind? I think for me, it's the split personality Gollum Smeagol scene is certainly a standout. Just if you're going to pick a scene to perfectly showcase Andy Serkis's acting talent, specifically from this film, it would probably be that. Any other ones? I mentioned the Elrond monologue during Evenstar. Gandalf falling with the Balrog at the beginning of the film is incredible. Even still, I love the bit where it's falling, it clips the side of the rock and it spins around and you see like Gandalf grab its horn. That shot in particular. I don't know, is there anything else that we haven't mentioned?
I think that in my passion for this film, I've spoken about pretty much every scene in the film, so I think it's hard to think of anything that I haven't spoken about.
I like the clever reveal of the fell beast, you know, when it's like
that was cool,
the ring race, and it looks like it's in the, you know, in the stirrups, it's holding the reins on the horse, and then the camera pans back. Oh no, it's almost like a goddamn dragon. Yeah, essentially, yeah. Tolkien fans, I know it's not a dragon. I know it's not a dragon, but it's basically.
But for the average moviegoer at that time, it might as well have been.
Yeah.
I really love the Forbidden Pool scene I've spoken about before. I love Gollum's little song just slapping the fish on the side of the rock. I love that. I think it's great. The Coney scene I think we were talking about before, I really like that. I like these little simple moments that sort of showcase Gollum as a character, especially with his relationship with Sam, all the fat hobbits and all that sort of stuff. I love their antagonistic relationship. And I think it foreshadows obviously the events of Return of the King really well. I forget, is Merry and Pippin finding Saruman's stash in this film, or is that Return
in the extended edition? Yeah,
that scene. Love that scene. They just sit in there.
I wouldn't touch that food though. Like, he picks up a whole chicken that's floating in that gunky, disgusting, dirty water. I'm not eating that chicken. I don't care how hungry I am.
Food for weeks. They want some meat. No, I love the barrel of salted pork with Gimli. I think that's in the third film. But,
it is.
And they're sitting there and they're like, they find the long bottom leaf. They're like, should we tell Treebeard? They're like, no, I shouldn't tell you. It might be a distant ancestor. You know, it's not. I love that because I think it adds, especially with Merry and Pippin, they've been having a shit time. They've been kidnapped, beaten up, thrown into a forest, looked after by trees. They've gone to war, and now they've just had a awful time. And then they find that little bit of home, and they have a little bit of banter, that back and forth. It's such a lovely way to round out, because I think that's the last scene of them in the film.
Yeah, for this film,
and it's such a lovely way to round that out. And again, obviously introduces them as like the Lords of Isengard in the third film, and they catch up with the hunters, and I love that. I think that's a lovely little send off for those two characters.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'd be struggling to think of it. Well, I wouldn't struggle to think of any more, but we've talked about a lot during this review. But if we haven't mentioned any key moments,
there's one more quotable line, and that's "Meat's back on the menu, boys."
Oh my god!
I haven't mentioned that one. Yeah, that's
would be a miss to not mention. Yeah.
I know, I love that. That little argument between them is absolutely brilliant. I love the infighting between the orcs. Again, it's excellent characterization and leads into their battle tactics and stuff later on.
I mean, I love the fact that the Uruk-hai, among any race in Middle-earth, know what a menu is. That menu.
It implies that there are restaurants in the Uruk-hai camps, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Peter
I
Jackson,
do
for your
like the
world
banter
building.
between them, especially in the book. Like that's some of my favorite stuff in the book is between the Urukai. It
Yeah.
almost feels like work colleagues kind of bad mouthing the boss,
Yeah.
like the manager or something.
Yeah.
And I like how, especially in the extended edition, they show that kind of class between the regular orcs and the Urukai. How there's a there's a pecking order
Yeah.
when it comes to Oh, meat's on back on the oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I think just taking it
I
to the final thoughts then, unless we have anything else to say on it. But final thoughts for me, I mean, I love all of these films. I see them all as one big film, so it's very difficult for me to say, this is my favorite, this is
Yeah, of
next favorite,
course.
whatever. This for the longest time was my favorite out of the three. As I've sort of like got older and sort of gravitated towards the books a bit more, I can see some sort of like holes in the adaptation, ever so slight, like the fake out death scene of Aragorn, as I mentioned. But there's nothing in this film that's even close to remotely damning or anything like that I get up in arms about, like, oh, this is terrible. I can absolutely see why they made all of the decisions they did for the sake of adaptation. And I still think, like was the case with Fellowship of the Ring, which itself changed a lot from the book, or removed a lot, the core sensibilities are there, the core themes and meaning and everything. It just gets to them in a slightly different way. It kind of meanders off and does its own thing, but I think inherently all the core sensibilities from all of those characters and whatnot, and those tensions and the drama between characters, it's all there. And of course, the film gives us some of the best action scenes, if not the best on-screen battle scene of all time, that will never be topped as far as I'm concerned.
I completely agree. And yeah, like I do say this was my favorite, and like I said in the last review, it's like picking favorites between favorites. Like I love all of these films, and like this one I think just speaks to me so much more. And I think it's because of the introductions of some of my favorite characters. I love Theoden, I love Faramir, I love Gollum, and you have these focus on these characters, and then obviously it rounds it out with Helm's Deep and Sam's speech and these lovely little charming moments that I think just tie everything together. I think it has the most standalone story because you're introduced to Rohan and it resolves their problems in sort of one film, which I don't think any of the other films really do. I think it tells the most complete story, but again, it is just, it's one of those films that, like, if I sit down, I can hear the music, I can watch the film, I can love it. When they films were re-released in the cinema last year, I didn't see Fellowship or Return of the King in the cinema, but I did see Two Towers in the cinema. I made sure I went out of my way to watch this because I obviously, as a younger Tolkien fan, I never saw these in the cinemas. So being able to finally see Helm's Deep on the big screen was a special moment. Wasn't the extended cut, so obviously that was a bit jarring because it was honestly my first time ever seeing the Two Towers not as the extended cut. So I got very confused at times with the pacing, but overall it was a great experience. So yeah, no, for me, I think I'm glad that we've been able to spend so long talking about this, and I apologize for the people listening to me rant for quite as long as I did in Helm's Deep. I wish it had been longer too, but here we are. We only have a finite amount of time.
I'm sure people watching this review, if they have tuned in for the 2 hour 15 review, I don't think they're going to be angry at you for gushing about Helm's Deep at all. Fair. I think we're all in the same boat. Of course, we could talk about this film till the cows come home. We could talk for a week on this film if we wanted to, if we really could. But we can't, unfortunately. And in a matter of a few hours, actually, I need to get a film watch now. I might have to push the stream back a little bit later tonight. I'll be talking about The Matrix, but we're still talking about Lord of the Rings right now. We want to hear from you guys. Let us know what you think of the Two Towers, the whole trilogy, everything. This is just a celebration of Peter Jackson's trilogy, Tolkien, Absolutely. Lord of the Rings in general. We've got one more left.
That's no. Honestly, if this feels like a journey that we've been on through these little reviews, Chris. It's been nice. It's been good.
The perfect person to get on for these
reviews.
Honestly, I'm so glad that you're joining me on this trilogy because
I'm very glad I am too. I don't ever get to nerd out over Lord of the Rings like this, so this is a dream come true for me, Chris.
So when we're at work together, we talked a little bit. We can only talk about Lord of the Rings so much when you're on shift together and whatnot. But this has been like
2
culmination.
full hours to talk about one of the films. A 6 hour probably looking at a review of this trilogy by the end of this. So
are we going to go the route of the extended editions? Like we were like 150 for Fellowship, we're on 220 for Two Towers. God knows what we're going to be for Return of the King.
Just like 6 hours for longer than the film.
At least, at the very least. I think.
I mean, arguably speaking, for most people, it is the best one. It's the most critically acclaimed one. It has all the laudits. So also, in my opinion, it is the most flawed one as well. So I think there are a lot of things we can talk about next time, which is going to be interesting.
It's going to be a great discussion. It's going to make me really sad when we finish them. It's like, no,
I know,
no
honestly,
more Lord of
that's
the
it's
Rings.
emotional. It's an emotional time.
And of course, social medias to find out when we are going to go live for that. I am going to bring up the date of it just in a second. But in terms of time, you can follow us on Twitter at cinema_savvy and Facebook and letterbox.com/cinema savvy. And of course, we'll be back for Return of the King, which will be Wednesday, the 29th of December. Mark your calendars. That is going to be an incredible review that we're going to dive into. I might also throw some watch-alongs in there, perhaps, maybe, if the people really want it. But what am I going to talk about for Lord of the Rings next year? I'm sure I'll find something for the 20th of Two Towers. But
we'll just do it again. What we'll do is me and you will react to our reviews and we'll argue with ourselves.
I guarantee if we set up the camera next year to do another Two Towers review, we'd do a completely different review. There's enough content in the film we could do an entirely.
I guarantee there's at least another 2 hours of content of stuff we haven't discussed yet.
Oh, bare minimum. So, absolutely. But yeah, of course, that's Return of the King extended edition review. Of course, that's Wednesday the 29th. That'll do it from us. Once again, Harry, thank you so much for devoting more than 2 hours of your time today on this Monday evening. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been an absolute blast, Chris. Again, thank you for having me on. Thank you. Yeah, it's been an absolute treat. I'm really looking forward to Wednesday so we can round out this trilogy and wrap it all up. But yeah,
me too. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Thank you to everyone that commented along, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care,
bye, guys.